Right, good morning everybody. Sorry, I'm a bit late in the chair. Welcome, and if I could just open by letting you all know that we've got Te Karere screening live this morning at their request. So if I remind those that want to speak, could you please turn on your microphone, because otherwise we're finding that even with our live streaming, some of the auditory streaming is a bit difficult to hear. And and also that PowerPoints are on the website. So for councillors that are watching the Rotorua Lakes Council website, it's on the front page, and that's, if you want to get into it, it's www.rotorua.lc.nz. So it's just good for you all to know how to access that, so that you can follow what's happening. So I'll declare the meeting open, and are there any apologies?
Yes, Your Worship. Councillor Hunt phoned in. Apology for lateness, should be 10 minutes.
Great. Do I have a mover and a seconder that... He should move because he did mention Councillor Hunt, and seconded by Councillor Gould. Thank you, be accepted. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary carried. Are there any declarations of interest? Appear to be none, and we move to page 4 with a staff report on online voting. Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Rokawa Tate. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary carried. John Paul, you're going to introduce this report. Thank you.
Morning, councillors. Councillors, this is obviously a report that's come to you with a deadline of the 4th of September. So that's the date we need to feed back as to whether we are prepared to be involved in the pilot with the other 9 councils around online voting. Councillors,
wrong. Excuse me, JP. We've got the next agenda item up. If we could just go to the online, that comes up later. Page 4.
Your Worship, I haven't got a presentation for this. It's a reasonably short.
We'll just keep the other one off.
Yeah.
Great. So people aren't confused.
So, councillors, you may recall that this council has been involved for a number of years with the online working party. Council's previous chief executive sat on that group. So this has been discussed around local government for at least the last 5 years, and really now it has received government support to at least trial for the next election. So that is why our name has come forward into this space. Again, it's trying to look at councils who have a mix of populations, whether it's Māori and Pākehā populations, urban and rural. So it's trying to sort of get a mix across the country so that they can really get an understanding of how successful online voting might be to improve participation in local body elections. Councillors, you will recall that we have over the last 3 years seen a sort of a plateauing of our involvement in the voting processes, and it's about 44% from the last election. It dipped to 43 for the previous election and was 44 for the 2007 election. So we're still tracking slightly above the national average, but really this is an opportunity for us to really see if there's a way of encouraging greater involvement in local body elections, particularly for younger people, which really see a dramatic drop in involvement. And if people aren't captured early in the voting process, there's some information that really leads to a view that they do not ever engage within local body elections process. So the key factor here is the government has been quite clear around the standards for online voting. So they've put in place some quite stringent requirements around the security for online voting, and it must be run in parallel to the normal postal voting service. So that also leads to the costs involved here. So that's why the costs are reasonably high for an online voting process. Councillors, as you're aware, we also undertake elections for 2 regional councils that that operate across our district, and also for the Lakes DHB. So each of those parties have also been contacted just to confirm their support for involvement in this trial. So we do actually have their support, because slightly over half of the cost of the trial for the Rotorua Lakes area would be passed on to those other two councils and to the DHB. So we do have their support for this trial as well. So happy to answer any other questions.
We'll get to the questions. If I could just ask, because there seems to be confusion in the public's eyes, that it's online or postal. Can you talk about the options?
Your Worship, my understanding is that we still run the normal postal process, so people still receive a pack and can participate just by filling in their forms as usual and returning them by post. The alternative option is that you can seek to receive a login, and that gives you a sort of secure gateway through to an online option so that you can actually undertake your voting online. Now obviously there's security built into that and requirements about the verification, and also to ensure that people aren't voting twice, once postally and then once online. So there is processes that have been built into it, and the government standards have been quite stringent around making sure both options were available and both options were secure and covered.
Open now for questions. I'll take them round the table and everyone will get an opportunity. Councillor Rotorua.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mine's not a question. It's just that I want to speak in support of it when you're ready.
Ring.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to clarify, JP, so what we're talking about here is $240 for the postal voting and an extra $45 for the online voting. Is that how it reads? And the other $55 comes from the District Health Board and the two regional councils.
That's correct. The key for this trial is to make sure that the integrity of the existing postal service is maintained. So we have a provider who has that cost, and so that is the total cost for the elections of $240,000. So this would be an additional $100,000 on top, of which $45 comes home to the Rotorua Lakes Council.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
Madam Chair, that was one of my questions. The total cost will be $340,000, of which the extra component will be a cost to the Rotorua ratepayers of $45,000 to participate in the trial. And JP, you mentioned with regard, I've had a number of phone calls about online voting and postal voting concerned regarding that, but this is similar to the census process last time, where you got a particular number and you used that and that was secure, so your papers were null and void if you gave them to the enumerator. Is that correct?
Your Worship, I think that's probably one of the reasons why the government has supported this, is because of the extremely high numbers of people that did undertake the census online. So I think there's a growing confidence around the security proposals that came through both the Working Party and then from the government's own experience with the census. So I think that's led to the confidence in saying, right, we're now in a position where we can successfully, working with these providers, undertake an online trial.
Maxwell, you had a question?
So this is the question on online only, not the other one. With the online one, maybe some of the board members from the LDHB can help as well, but do they still have that confusing STV thing? Is it going to make it even worse by online because it's confusing enough with the postal one, postal voting?
It's a very good question, and actually the DHB is quite supportive of the online option, because one of the problems they have is because the regional council elections and the local body elections are sort of first past the post, so it's ticking the candidates. Yes. The DHB runs the single transferable vote option, so you actually have to number your choices in a ranked order. They actually seeing the online option as improving their their failed return rates. So rather than people having their votes discounted because they've ticked, you would not have been able to enter that in the fields online. So people will not be able to submit a vote online for the DHB without having correctly numbered. So it actually improves their return rates for the election. So they're quite positive about the online option as a way of improving what's been a major problem for them.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've got a couple of questions. First of all, you state here that the net cost of the trial is $45,000, but that is based on all 10 authorities going ahead with the trial. My understanding is the government is going to select some to go ahead with the trial. So what is the cost going to be if not all 10 go ahead with the trial to this council?
Your Worship, at this stage, they are trying to get all 10 to go forward. So that's the intention. So you're correct, I do not know what the numbers breakdown would be if some councils choose not to participate. At this stage, this is the assumption here is that all 10 councils will agree to it. The deadline for that decision is the 3rd of September.
Does that mean then that if, for example, only this council and maybe one or two others went for it, we could be up for 100,000?
Councillors, I think at that point there would have to be a relook at whether a trial was to proceed at all. I think the key and one of the objectives around this was to make sure that we had a geographic, a demographic and an understanding of different communities and how they might participate and be involved with this trial. So I think the important thing is here to try and make sure that at least a substantial portion of these councils are committed to it. I think there is a likelihood, and I can't speak for any other councils, that there has been some considerable support from those councils to these trials. So I think similar to us, which have been involved in the Working Party for a number of years, that the number of councils who may decline is likely to be very low or nil. So, but it would affect the cost overall.
Could I just add to that, at LGNZ on the governance group of which I'm on in Wellington, there's a clamour for local authorities wanting to go to an online option. So we'll see, you're right, but it comes out after every general election and local body election in DHB debrief. It goes before a select committee in Parliament. And there's a constant call for online voting as an option to try and increase the participation. I was going to say that in debate, but it sort of answers your question. You would have to look at it again if there were only two of us, you know. Councillor
Thank you.
Hunt,
My next question relates to the security aspects of it. As you know, I'm an experienced in the computer industry, and I have some major concerns about the security of online voting. Particularly since under the current system we have a number of terrorist groups quite ably proving that they can hack into all sorts of government departments, banks and all sorts going on at the moment. I would need to be very, very, reassured that the security of this has been very thoroughly investigated and that we're not just buying a bucket full of trouble. So perhaps JP could comment on that, please.
Your Worship, I suppose for me the key points here is that the Working Party has been talking about this for a number of years. They have engaged significantly with government, and in supporting this trial, government has been quite explicit in the conditions around security. I'm certainly taking that as the reassurance that those who have the knowledge and have the skills to make those judgments about how to ensure what is a fundamental part of our local community's representation is secure. And I think that's been driven into the conditions that have been set by government and the expectations placed on the providers to ensure that security. I think there's also a significant amount of government experience around their move to more online services. And certainly the census is the other area where they have also sought to test security quite rigorously. So, Council, I can't offer any more reassurances than that. Than I believe that the government's had a very long look at this. There's been a huge amount of discussion with the providers and through that working party through Local Government NZ. So I think that's probably the as far as I can go in providing you with that reassurance.
And my final question is, do we have any idea of the percentage of voters in the Rotorua district that actually have access to the internet? Because in my experience, it's actually very low.
But certainly that's part of the initiative that Dave Donaldson's leading about black spot funding so that we can increase the spread of access to internet.
It's not black spots, Your Worship. This is just people can't afford the internet in Rotorua.
That's right. That's right. So they have the choice of paper voting. In answer to that, JP, as supplementary, how secure is our current voting system?
Your Worship, I suppose this is the question about the mail-out process. So obviously there's risks around the mail not being delivered, but then people are able to make special votes. So there's a manual system that protects this. As far as voters within particular households, I think we all anecdotally hear of someone being tasked with filling in the election returns. It's an important process that we should all be involved in, but sometimes people choose not to, or choose not to vote at all. So I suppose the whole intention of this is to try and encourage people through the most convenient option for them, whether that's online or to continue the current postal system. Councillors, there's a percentage of somewhere between 60 and 70% of access to computers that I recall from the previous census. I haven't seen the most recent census figures, but it is a fairly high proportion, and we do not have a lower proportion probably than the rest of the country, is my understanding.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just was interested with some of the things JP said. So how are we going to let people know what their login will be? Is that going to be via a mail out, or how is that all going to work? We're going to post them their login, so...
Your Worship, you're getting into details that I'm not quite specifically clear on. My understanding is there is a process where people will go in and either register to receive an online PIN number, which gives them access. So there is a process around that. So it is a duplicate system, and there is the options for people to how they engage in that. A good example, councillors, might be to watch how it's unfolding with the Te Arawa Lakes Trust election and the Te Arawa Board election over the next couple of months. They are certainly using online voting, and it's also the same provider as our electoral officer as well. So a good example to watch the participation rates and the process would be to observe what happens with the Te Arawa Lakes Trust Board elections and the Te Arawa Lakes Trust as well.
I just would like to say, Madam Chair, that I do appreciate that it is detail. Having said that, this is all about detail, isn't it? And the issues that arise through the postal voting. So we have to be mindful of that and just be aware of what we're going into. And security, I believe, is something that we need to be reassured of. So will we have all that information back? I know we registered our interest for online voting a number of years ago, and it's finally come to this point. When would we get that sort of information?
Your Worship, it's just inconveniences around our electoral officer's availability. He was trying to be here today to answer off more of these detailed questions. I can certainly schedule to come to the next Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee a presentation from our electoral officer, really just to go through some of this detail so that you can be reassured, and it really raises awareness out in the community as to how the process will be undertaken as well. So he has made that offer to us.
No, just that Apologies for lateness. I understand that you said there are 10 councils in the country. Have they self-referred themselves to be part of it, or were there more that applied for this opportunity?
My understanding that there was more, and Her Worship has signalled that as well. And I think that's one of the ways to ensure that now that we're down to the cost picture and the issue Councillor Kent has raised is there may be some councils still waiting in the wings who weren't selected, but that process was undertaken probably about 8 to 12 months ago, the expressions of interest to be involved, and it was wider than the current 10 on the list. Again, some of the selection criteria here was getting a spread across the current electoral services providers and geographically and demographically as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got two questions. The page 6, 7.3, risks. There are no major risks associated with the decisions on matters, and yet Mr Dunn was quoted on page 2 of yesterday's Daily Post saying that the risks are security, accuracy and availability of technology.
Your Worship, I think that really comes back to the previous questions I've answered, which is really us relying on the significant work undertaken by the Working Party around crafting a process that's appropriate, and then the government's own experience in running processes like the census. So their rather high bar around security is really what's driven quite a substantial cost into this trial.
No, the reason why for that question is that you said there's no risk involved, yet there are major risks.
Your Worship, from our perspective, what I've just described, in my view, is the mitigations to those risks. So what's happened through those working parties and through the government standards and discussions with the providers is to actually set a very high bar on security for the online service. And of course the other risk relates to actual people's ability to engage with that. Now they clearly have the option of using the online process, which has had a very high security bar put in place, but there's also the fallback position, which is the traditional postal vote process will be undertaken in full as it has in the past.
Question relates to when we get the postal votes, we've got 2 or 3 weeks to send them in. Yet with the computer system, you can log in straight away. Is there facility for the people to change their mind? Because during that 2-week process, some councillors make different comments, or some residents haven't made up their mind totally on who they're going to vote for.
Your Worship, I don't believe that's possible. Once you've lodged your vote, you've lodged your vote. So I suppose that's one of the things maybe when all councillors and potential councillors are out campaigning is just to encourage people to listen, take notes of what's happening during that campaign period and vote when they feel confident to make that vote.
Elizabeth, questions? Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too am concerned about the security of this system, but I also am concerned about the security of the postal system, because Councillor Sturt, Tapsell and Gould and myself attended a meeting out at Rotorua club rooms before the last elections, and one of the senior people in the audience proudly stated that we would get 18 votes because he was filling in 18 forms. So I think that this system enables people to be dishonest if they so wish, and it gives them more opportunities.
Just to clarify a couple of matters that have been raised around the table. The DHB STV system is in legislation. The DHB cannot change to go back to first past the post. And the issue with regard to computers, if I haven't got a computer, I'll go down to my rich neighbour, Councillor Sarank, and use her computer. Oh, yours is ancient, okay. But what happens, Madam Chair, as I understand it, like with the census, when you picked up your census papers, in a sealed perforated envelope was a code, and that code will be linked to your electoral roll number. Should you use it, that obviates if you then send in your postal vote, it's void. So I can't see it as a problem. JP, you mentioned the other councils. I see they've gone across the board with a mixture of metropolitan areas, provincial areas, and rural areas. And does that add strength to the reason why we've been asked to be part of the trial?
Yes, Your Worship. That is one of the drivers for it, is again getting that mix of urban, rural, city and provincial centres, and trying to get from the top end of the country to the bottom end of the country. It's not quite fully covering top to bottom, but it's certainly giving that diversity across the country. Really, they're keen to see if the added value created in voter turnout, and trying to, you need a sample that's big enough to give you that picture about whether it's been a successful way of encouraging more people to participate in local body elections.
I understood that 55% of people used the online option at the census. It was 2 years ago.
I can't correct you, but JP may know that figure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to say that I'm very pleased to see this, that we're going to put our hand up to at least attempt to participate in this online voting. From the questions that I've heard this morning, it's obvious that some of our councillors do not currently vote online. I do for 2 organisations. I was elected to 1 board through the postal voting, so it's certainly not new to me. I believe there will be a high uptake if we are successful in being able to take part in the trial. And I don't worry about the security. I know that the government looks at this very carefully, and as you say, JP has said the Working Party is looking at that as well. So we don't have sufficient computers in homes. We have a lot of computers in our city that will allow people to participate. I think the good thing about this is that it has the potential to actually change the representation that will go forward to lead the city at some stage in the future. So I'm really positive about this and will certainly support it.
Councillor Donaldson and then Councillor Gould.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Also speak in support of the trial. We are on a digital journey and we're looking at better digital enablement for everyone in the district. But speaking to the security aspects also, we apply for our passports and pensions online now using a RealMe login, and you can park the process and come back to it. So Councillor Gould's concern about, having to do the whole thing or changing his mind, all of those systems work really well where you can park the process and within a certain number of days come back and complete the process. So I'm hopeful that sort of facility will be built into the online voting because you've got 3 entities that you're voting for during it. And I think while that our youth are very digitally savvy, I think increasingly through U3A and other initiatives, the seniors in our society are getting with technology far more. So, and they have to with pensions and passports, So it's simply the way of the world. What I would like to think, though, is if this trial is a stunning success, that it'll be one or the other in the future at subsequent elections and not the cost of 2 systems. And there'll always be the backup of the special voting booth here if you can't cope with the digital. So, I fully support.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's be a proactive council. Lead the rest of the councils in New Zealand saying we have got behind this process and we've gone down the computer process, letting people vote. But what I may suggest is that when people come in to do voting upstairs here in the upstairs room 3 years ago, we have a computer available for people to use, because people may know how to use a computer but haven't got access to a computer, but they've been using a computer, say at Senior Net, or using a computer at the library. That gives them an opportunity to be secure, to be safe, be able to vote and give them a choice. Let's go for it. advertise it. Make
And-
big PR stories about it.
And there is also access to computers at the library. Councillor Hunt?
I think it's a very progressive way forward. It's inclusive, particularly for our people in our community who do live out of town and often miss those opportunities. I know it's been a problem for people who travel to do special votes because they're out of town at that time. And also, there's great synergy for our community with the other item on our agenda, excuse me, about our election review. Regardless of how that vote goes today, this is an opportunity to really reinvigorate the democratic space. So I'm very supportive of it. I think that the promotion over this and the promotion over our changes will actually remind our community that they have a voice, and here's the opportunity to exercise it.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too support the concept because I think it's the way of the future. I've expressed my reservations. I would like, however, some assurance from the executive that should we find out that this is not going to end up costing us $45,000, suddenly it's going to be $100,000, that is actually brought back to council rather than just rubber stamped.
I notice Chief Executive nodding, so do you want to comment? No. Anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Tapsell?
Yeah.
Thank you.
This one's computerised.
Oh, quadraphonic, yeah.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Technology. No, so I guess just to add to the other councillors' comments, and also some of the concerns. So some of the concerns are on access, but New Zealand actually has really high access to internet. So if you look at the 2012 census statistics, we actually have 1.3 million 1.3 million homes that are connected to the internet. So that's 80% of New Zealand homes are connected. Now, being a young person, I can see the benefits of having online voting, but the majority of our users that use the internet are actually aged 15 to 44. So this is actually all about providing access to voting. Because at the moment, it says that across the country, it's showing that only 4 out of 10 people care because only 4 out of 10 people are actually voting. And I don't agree with that. I think it's purely just access. So if we can provide this as an opportunity, not just the only thing, but just as an opportunity, another way to access voting, then I think that's incredible. And as Councillor Hunt said, it is more inclusive. For those that didn't have internet access, the main reason was just a lack of interest. So I think that's a fair point to say 80% have it, but it also says it's not for everyone, that there is still a lot of, is a very good reason to still have the postal voting. But I think, hey, why not? Let's take this chance. Let's be a leader. It is different. I can understand and respect concerns over security, but as we've already said, you know, the census has done it previously. We have Māori Trust and other organisations that are doing online voting, and the success is really showing for itself. So I think we can really take a good step forward and a good step together with our community, asking some of our community what they thought about this. Funnily enough, it came to 78% of them said, yes, we should. And one of the comments was, why don't we have it already? So, you know, let's take this step forward, and I'm definitely in support of this.
And yes, Councillor Maxwell.
That listening to the good debate on the online one, does it mean through you, Madam Mayor, to JP, if a home receives postal voting and then they go on to the machine, by not sending it in, is there a saving on the mail drop, or do they charge us for every mail letter with our stamp on it out? Is there a saving?
Yes, there is a savings.
Oh, good. Okay.
So that they're sort of postage paid, so that depending on the return rate, our bill is related to that, or our costs are related to that. It's not significant in the total costs of the overall election process. And really the key for us here is that we've still had to send out the full packs and duplicate the processes in this case. So certainly for this trial, it's it's plenty. It's the full usual as if it was postal, plus the online service as well. But yes, we would see a small savings if more people used the online option.
And I just want to speak that I'm supportive. I never thought a voter turnout of 43.8% was really a mandate from our community. And anything that lifts that participation, I think, is important. Interestingly enough, it's just over 25,500 people didn't vote last election. It's a lot. And when you think of the non-resident voters that we've got here, a lot of holiday homes batch owners that are ratepayers that would like this option, makes it so much easier for them. Also the rural community would find it easier as an option, and they've said to us very clearly in the next item that they've felt a bit disconnected. So it's another option. And just having had that previous experience of looking at election responses in central government, this question about why haven't we gone online a lot earlier is a national question and being asked after every election. So I really support this initiative. I think it's hopefully going to give greater turnout, and that's what we're wanting. Greater participation, engagement and better voter turnout. So I support this. Appears to be nobody else wishing to speak. All those in favour of Resolution 2 that Council confirm their intention to participate in the online elections for the 2016 local government elections. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried unanimously. Wonderful. We move on now to the next item on our agenda, which is recommendation 2. Go to page 7 in your agenda. And Una, before you speak, I'll just call for a mover and a seconder to receive the report. Yep, Councillor Serang, Councillor Gould, seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. And before I ask you, Una, to speak, I wonder if, Medipeka, you led this Your Choice initiative, if you'd just like to acknowledge those participants.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I would like to first of all thank my fellow councillors and yourself, Your Worship, for the opportunity to be part of the working committee, or the working party, with Councillors Sturt and Sharank. And sorry, beg your pardon.
She wanted to be.
I've got you on my mind, Councillor. Councillors Sturt and Councillors Tapsell. But also, obviously, for our community reps to Aroha Bray, who is present this morning, Brian Eagle and Jill Nicholas, who is overseas. Because to work with people from the community, when you're looking at something like this, a piece of work like this, it's exciting to get their views. And as you know, we went out to the community just to raise awareness about what the review was we're hoping to achieve. And again, it's looking into the future and looking at our future arrangements. But I was delighted to be part of that, and I just wanted to acknowledge our community representatives and the input that they had that allowed us to put a paper this morning that isn't about where we are now in terms of representation, but it's about where we want to be in the future. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. And before you start, Una, if I acknowledge those from the community board here, this is of great interest, I'm sure, to you. But thank you for coming this morning to show your interest in this item for the agenda. Okay, Una.
Good morning, everyone. Just ask for your indulgence as I make my way through the presentation. I'm struggling with a bit of a cold today, so please, I may need to pause every now and then and take a sip of water, but I'll launch into it and we'll see how we go. Right, so just to recap on the journey on where we have come from to bring you this initial proposal today. So Council is required to undertake a representation review, and that has to be done at least once every 6 years. And in that review, we also look at the community boards. As part of that review, the following gets considered. We look at how many councillors, ranging from 6 to a total of 30, and that is inclusive of the mayor. We look at whether those elections are held across the district, so at large, or whether you split the district into wards. If you choose to split the district into wards, there needs to be a decision put forward on the ward boundaries, and then also the number of councillors that would represent each ward. The review also looks at the establishment or the disestablishment of community boards. The representation review is a 3-step process, and 2 decisions are made prior to the actual representation review. The first one is the method of voting, and that's a decision around either first past the post or the single transferable vote, and council made its decision to retain first past the post. The second part of the review is actually to look at the introduction of Maori wards, and as you will recall, council at the time voted against these. So then in February, a paper was brought to council to look at establishing a working party that would undertake the review and bring back the initial proposal to you. So that working party consisted of Councillor Mary Peka Rakawa-Tate, Araho Bray, Charles Sturt, Brian Eagle, Councillor Tapsell and Jill Nicholas. The working party has been undertaking a community engagement approach, and this has been led from April through to July. And as we have previously stated, that community engagement process was really about going out into the community, raising awareness around what this review actually was and is all about, and also getting feedback on what people's views were around the current model and what other options could be looked at in going forward. The Working Party have established a set of objectives and they have been based around the Rotorua 2030 goals, and in particular looking and staying true to that resilient community. So looking at being inclusive, livable and safe neighbourhoods that give us a sense of place and confidence to be involved and connected. So the Working Party's objectives, as they've gone through the community engagement, they've come up with these here that have been their basis for putting together the initial proposal, and that was that clearly there was a need for change. There was a need for a rural and a lakes voice. The community also saw that they needed to have opportunities where they could be involved in local decision making, and that there were processes for them to come in and out of projects when there was a special interest in particular to them. That a model is fair and that there is the ability to elect as many councillors as possible. So the initial proposal, you will recall that we had a councillor forum on the 5th of August, and we brought back to you then the results of the feedback and what were some of the general steers that were coming out of that. And we also put forward an initial proposal, so where the Working Party saw a model shaping up at that time. From that forum, a number of questions have been raised, and the Working Party have then gone away and they've tested those questions against the objectives and of the legal requirements. So a number of adjustments have been made to that initial proposal, and in particular around the wards and the community boards. So if we now look at what the Working Party is proposing as the initial proposal, the first mechanism is the number of councillors. So the proposal is suggesting 11 elected members, being 10 councillors and 1 mayor. So that is a reduction in 2 councillors. The reasoning for that is around this fair representation across the district, and looking at the district is approximately 65,000 people with 10 elected members. We've got that sort of ratio of 1 elected member to 6,500 people, and that was considered to be quite fair. Also, based on that, there is that feeling of an equal sharing of effort and workload across councillors in relation to portfolios and to projects and community-based work. The Working Party are also strongly suggesting that the use of portfolios as a mechanism to obtain grassroots issues needs to be considered when we're looking at those themes that cut across the whole district future development. This, even though cost wasn't a driving factor in this, questions that were raised from that initial forum around the ward system and looking at whether wards was actually a way to go, did bring the Working Party back to actually looking at costs. If we went further down the track of splitting the district up into into wards, you then have to overlay some legislative rules around numbers. And in sticking with the ward system, it was looking like we were actually going to have to propose more councillors, and that would have increased costs. So this proposal here actually looks like having a sort of a net savings of approximately $52,000. So the second mechanism is looking at the choice between an at-large system, a ward system, or a mixed system. You will recall from the initial forum the proposal was for a mixed system, which would have consisted of 3 wards and then an at-large. Going back with questions that were raised from that initial forum, and comparing against the objectives, that ward component didn't actually meet the objectives. In a ward system, depending on how many wards you want to split the district up into, you then have to take the whole of the district and split those across the wards. So in our case, that 65,000 population is then needing to be split across the 3 wards that was initially proposed, and that meant roughly sort of 21,000 people in each ward. Now, that in itself raises a whole lot of concerns, because the going back to the objectives around about having a voice, particularly for the rural and the lakes, was meaning that this ward system was actually diluting that voice. So in any one of those wards, you were going to be having a large component of the urban population spread over those wards. And on reflection, that didn't meet the Working Party's objectives, so they have gone back to retaining an at-large system. So the reasons for that was that this provides an opportunity for citizens to maximise their votes. You get that overview of the whole of the district's development issues, and it was considered the fairest way to represent a district that has approximately 80% of its community located in the same geographical space, being the urban area. There was also that reflection that we didn't want to repeat the old ward system, as those wards were artificial and they cut across communities of interest, and none of them had a significant community of interest at its core. And then just reiterating what I said before, was that the wards that we were initially looking at did not meet the objectives of the Working Party, because it didn't give that lakes or the rural voice, as that was being diluted by all this large urban population being included in the mix. So the final mechanism that the Working Party is able to consider is community boards, and to retain and actually look at how we can get that voice of the rural and the lakes. It is being put out in the proposal that we have 2 community boards. So the Lakes Community Board is retained, And in the proposal, you'll see that there has been a slight adjustment to the boundary of that Lakes Community Board, just to incorporate a few more areas that weren't previously under the Community Board boundaries. And that we establish a Rural Community Board. And this is being proposed to create that representation in two sectors of the district that feel underrepresented and who believe they've got no voice in the decisions that affect them. So in the proposal itself, those are the three sort of mechanisms that the Working Party are able under this review to actually put forward a proposal on. However, there isn't any legislation that sort of stops councils going further than a representation model and looking at how you can get that local decision making and working with your community. And with this in mind, the Working Party in their proposal have also put forward some suggestions of where they would like to see the council and the community moving forward in the future. So just to sort of run through those, they are suggesting that continue to use portfolios as a mechanism to obtain grassroots issues and looking at those cross-cutting themes for the district's future development. That the development of the concept of locational councillors to strengthen communities so that they can have input into projects and issues in local areas. Excuse me, that training and support is provided to councillors to enable that locational councillor responsibility to grow, and that as a council we continue to develop models that encourage community-led development and localised decision making. That's really around that building capacity and capability. I think this is my last slide. And just to come back to the community boards, when a community board is established, there are a limited set of delegations that they have, but the council can actually allow the community board more delegation and more powers. And the Working Party is suggesting that the next council actually consider providing the community boards with further delegations and powers so that they can be truly effective, and consider things like a share of budget allocation that they could administer and be accountable for in the area. And that they're also suggesting to consider that the chairs of each community board have the delegation to sit and vote on the council committees. And the Working Party's final proposal, I think, is that in consultation with Te Arawa, that a TAPP review is undertaken.
Can go through this. Have a drink.
I think by the time you finish, I think this must be Una's last slide here, which of course just highlights again, councillors, the process. So coming down the left-hand side, you can see there that we're now through to this important date, 26th of August, so that's the second blue box where the initial proposal is adopted by council to go out for public consultation. So councillors, as you're aware, we've got an ideas store at the moment, so corresponding with that available facility, we'd be doing some consultation there, but also making the public release of the proposal so people can actually make some submissions. So really the kick-off date we've got there so that your decision can be confirmed in the documentation is by the 8th of October. Obviously submissions come back with the view that we have a hearings process around those submissions on the proposal, which is 29th and 30th of October. Councils then has the opportunity to adopt the proposal. Now, we have an additional step here from some of our other consultation processes, which there is an opportunity for any groups that are not satisfied with the hearing process and the final decision can actually appeal. Now, that appeal, I think, goes to the Local Government Commission, and there's a final determination by the Local Government Commission on any of those appeals by the 10th of April. Now, councillors who are here back more than 6 years will recall that was the process that really saw the Lakes Community Board established sort of 2 terms ago. So really that's the way that process can impact on things. So those decisions can be overturned, or we can have a decision imposed on us by the Local Government Commission. So really it's important that this is well discussed in the community and they understand what the proposal is, and as this working party has identified, what are some of the places we need to go beyond this to boost and encourage engagement with our communities?
Could you clarify for us before we go to further questions? That is the end of the presentation, isn't it, Una? You can nod your head. Questions. Right. Before we go to questions, what are the questions that go out as part of the consultation? Is it just what we're voting on with the 10 councillors at large, the Rotorua Lakes Community Board and the Rotorua Community Board, right, and supporting information? So it's not the recommendations and everything else that's there. Okay.
Through you, Madam Chair, the attachment to your report, which starts on page 12, your choice, is the full proposal, and that is what will go out. That is the consultation document, and it will have a submission form and frequently asked questions attached as part of that.
Questions? Councillor Mitwicker?
Your Worship. A couple of questions, if I may. Down the bottom of page 9, there's a statement there, the proposal will be difficult to reverse once Council has committed to it. Can you explain that why? Because in 6 years' time, another representation review could reverse that, if that happened to be the case. And secondly, the issue of community boards, and I'm delighted to see the Rural Community Board being recommended, having voting rights for the chairperson. Is that conventional, and does that apply just to council committee meetings or also council meetings? Can you just clear the air there, please?
So just answering the first question around the proposal or decision will be difficult to reverse. That is more because of the process where we are at now and the legislation timeline that we have. There needs to be a proposal that goes out. So what the working party are asking for is that this proposal goes out for consultation as is, that it would be very hard and difficult at this late stage to turn around a proposal that was contrary to this one. Correct, yes, yep. So your second question around the community boards, those are suggestions from the working party for the next incoming council to consider, and it would be up to them to go through a process to decide what delegations, what powers they would like to give to the community board and how they would like those community boards to interact and partake in decisions with them.
So just clarify for me, when you are voting, if you live in either the rural ward area or the Lakes ward area, you vote for those people there on a separate voting paper, but you still vote for your 10 at-large councillors.
That is correct. So an at-large system would mean that every person in the district gets 10 votes for councillors, plus 1 for the mayor. And then if you were in the boundaries of the Lakes Community Board area or the Rural Community Board area, you would vote for 3, was it 4? 4, thank you. 4 members to that community board.
Board community board is made up of rural representation from north, south, east and west, so to speak, right around the district. So it's a scattered area, community of interest.
Yes, it is. Yep.
Your comment about the wards, wasn't it? That if you had wards, it sort of encroached into the urban, and that was the difficulty.
It is a very scattered rural ward,
Yep.
and each one of them will have its own little community of interest. Yeah. So this has to be approved by the local government, doesn't it, by the Commission?
This is our recommendation to the Commission.
About technology. And the point that Councillor Srank just raised was one of the areas that I had, as a member of the Working Party, a concern about. But the numbers just didn't stack up. Initially, if you recall at the forum, our proposal was to have a North Rural Ward and a South Rural Ward. But the numbers, based on the 10 councillor, 6,500 per councillor, there weren't 13,000 people in the rural area to stack up with those numbers. So that's hence the compromise was to go to the community board. So I'm quite relaxed about that, having never been a fan of community boards, but certainly listened to the rural community who said or believed there was a disconnect and that they wanted to say. So we took it that step further outside the gambit of this review, and in those recommendations that Una referred to for the incoming mayor and council, that maybe a consideration be given to allowing, like with Te Arawa proposal, of allowing the chair of each of those community boards a seat at the committee level of the council. But that's for another process. But that's our intention, and that's why we recommended that. Thank you.
Maxwell?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before I just ask a couple of questions here, I too want to commend the Working Party, our councillors and the 3 independent people who obviously did a lot of thorough considerations for the things that they've presented to us. The one I have is the question, so the Lakes Community Board and the Rural Community Board will be still targeted rates only for those areas? Like it is now?
Presentation, you might want to answer that, not rates.
Well, targeted, it's...
Councillors, I think that's a decision you need to make at a later point. The decision you've made previously with your rating policy was to include a charge applied to provide that funding for that additional level of democracy or representation provided by the Rotorua Lakes Community Board. So that's a decision you need to make as to whether you extend that to the other community board area or collapse it back in to your general rates discussion.
Okay, and just the other one, I thought that was well done. Again, commend the committee for the innovative idea of recommending that the chairs participate at our committee level. So that's just a recommendation to us, is it, or to who? Because to me, hopefully they don't have to go through the harsh things that our Te Arawa proposal had to go through for over 12 months or so. So tell me the process on that. How will, I mean, I'm very supportive of that. I think it's innovative.
Your Worship, that's a decision for the next council. So as you come in post-election, so this is a recommendation from the Working Party, you do not need to take it up. But as that new council comes in and decides what committees it will have, its terms of reference and its delegations, you'll be able to take on board their recommendation and decide whether that's appropriate for the next council.
Thank you, Your Worship. It was just a question around the second part of the recommendation. So in one of Una's earlier slides, she said that the Working Party could consider between 6 and 30 councillors, and that number included the mayor. So I think just for completeness, the first bullet point should say a mayor and 10 councillors at large, just to clarify that the 10 doesn't include the mayor. Is that fair comment?
Yes, that is, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Una, do you think in the makeup of these community boards, as we have at the moment, we also have council law representation on those community boards? Would that carry on?
Yes, it would. That is a legal requirement as part of the makeup of the community board. The proposal is suggesting one elected member is nominated onto each of the community boards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions. With one of your previous slides, you put chair of each community board has delegation to vote on council committees. I've got no problems with that, but it should be chair or nominee or appointed person, because sometimes the chair might not be available. And you talk about the boards having delegations at budgets and different meetings like that. You've got 4 board members on each board. Are you proposing to have a meeting of 19 people, or are you proposing to have one nomination from each of those boards to those budgets? And the annual plan process is chaired by the mayor, which is counted as a full council meeting, which means that you rule out that opportunity of speaking at council committees because it's a full council meeting.
Councillor Gould, their considerations for the incoming council, there were recommendations. So there's something that would be noted by an incoming council, not requiring a detailed response today. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Your Worship. My first question is where did the sudden reduction of 2 councillors come from? Because unless I was asleep at the last time we actually had an update on this, there was absolutely no mention of it.
Councillor Kent, you are very correct. Our initial proposal was still to retain the 12. Following the questions from the forum, which were around, hey, does the ward system really meet the Working Party's objectives? When we went back to looking at, okay, so how can we get that voice of the rural community and the lakes community if we create another community board? We ran the numbers, so if you had, and I'm looking at Charles, my brain's gone a little bit fuzzy, we were trying to get that balance of still having effectively around about the same number of elected members across the board with this model compared to with the initial proposal model that we're putting forward compared to the proposal that we've got now. So from that, that's where the 10 councillors has come from, plus the discussion around that constant and fair spread of the workload compared to a community of our size.
Councillor Webber.
Excuse me, I haven't finished, Your Worship.
Oh, sorry.
If that reduction has suddenly come about without coming from the public, am I correct in thinking, therefore, this question of suddenly reducing the number of councillors has been raised by the Working Party and the staff?
Madam Chair, could I perhaps...
Yes,
I'm very happy to look at that. When we were looking at... Because we're not looking at this is not about councillors. This is not about the councillors that are sitting here and this is not a numbers game for councillors. This is about going forward. What we have had since we've been since 2013 election, we have been operating under the portfolios. They are becoming very effective, and by next year, more effective. And so we're talking about going forward from 2016, working efficiently, smarter, high-performing under the portfolio system. And therefore, we thought we can can do that with a reduction of councillors. I might add that in some of the submissions there was also a suggestion of that. Certainly nothing more than nothing going towards increasing the numbers of councillors. So our job was to look at what are the future needs, how can we work more smart and more efficient, and actually really hammer those portfolios and do them effectively.
So it had nothing to do with the 2 chairs that are needed around this council table for the committees for the Tiara members?
Not even a consideration.
Thank you. My next question then is the cost savings that have been put forward here. You've made no mention whatsoever of what the actual cost of the rural board is going to be. So if you made the cost saving in the reduction of staff members, of 2 councillors, and then you've added on the cost of this board, are we going backwards or forwards financially?
I believe, I just need to find the page number, it is in the proposal. So the estimates that we used were $40,000 for each councillor, so a reduction there of $80,000. And then looking at the cost of the community board, and I used what the chair and elected members receive now, and that came out with a net savings of $52,000. That is approximate because those costs do change from triennium to triennium, coming from the Remuneration Authority.
So you've only considered the actual stipends, you have not considered the operational costs and administrative costs of running the board?
I have taken that into consideration, and based on the team that we currently have, and if the council takes up the opportunity to have a better involvement with working with the community boards, I do not believe there is any additional operational costs.
That surprises me.
Madam Chair, point of order. This staff member isn't on trial. It was the working party that listened to the community's concerns and have made the report. It's not Una's job to justify what the working party did. We're happy to answer any questions and we put on the map, but certainly not a staff member.
It's not quite a point of order, but I think it was a legitimate question. These are questions, and we're just all trying to get our heads around this. And
Your Worship, I have no objection as to who actually answers my questions. I just would like my questions answered, please.
It's fair enough. Any further questions?
Yes, my next one. I'm still trying to get my head around this recommendation that you've got here, that chairs of these 2 boards are going to actually have voting rights on committees. So does that mean if I'm a Tiara farmer or I am a Tiara lakeside resident, that I am going to have 2 more representatives at a committee meeting putting my opinions and what I want forward than people in the rest of this district?
Madam Chair, perhaps I could answer that.
Yes,
The only reason I'm going to answer that, Madam Chair, we could, on the other hand, equally get 2 Hakars, one from the rural and one from the community. So what's the difference?
You're missing my point.
I'm getting your point very loud and clear.
My point is, if you are Tiara, then you have a Tiara representative on the committee. If you are a rural member, you have a rural member on the committee, similarly, or a Lakes member, right? But you also have the number of councillors that you have voted for barracking for your case. If you are a town member, or a townie, shall we say, you do not have those 2 extra voices at all, do you? Well, with respect, Your Worship, this was actually brought up at the last meeting that we had, and we asked the working party to go back and consider the ramifications of actually how you would stop sectors of the community having more say and more votes than the others, and I don't believe that what you're suggesting here actually does that.
it's a good point of debate, and I think when this goes out for, if we vote to take this out for consultation, there'll be just those sort of feedback coming
Madam
back.
Chair, it's not a good point. May I just say, it's not a good point of debate. This is somebody's skewed idea that there's something underhand at work here, and it's not. The integrity of the working party is at stake here, and it's quite wrong. It's not a discussion worthy of debate at all.
I just had a couple of questions, Your Worship. The first one is, I just wondered, perhaps, and it might be more in order for one of the working party members to answer, but I just want to understand the thinking around the rural ward, how it would work. I know it was a numbers issue, but, community board, because it does seem to be a difficult thing that you would have, it's sort of like circular around the cold air, isn't it, really? And they are not necessarily communities of interest, particularly. So I'm just trying to understand how you came to that, of how you believe it would work.
Would you like
if
to
they're
answer
going to
that?
have one, and if I can just explain further, like if they're going to have a budget, and in one area they might want to have some boat ramps, and they might want to have something done at the park, and then, you know, I'm just sort of imagining the bun fight that might come out of there, which we're all used to, of course, and thoroughly enjoy, but, and I guess we're giving them that opportunity as well. But I just wondered how it would work.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to answer that. First of all, we fully understand that not all the rural community have the same interests, obviously, and that was something that we had to look at very carefully. But don't underestimate the ability of the rural community to say this is an opportunity for us to work collaboratively across whether you're dry stock, whether you're dairy or whatever, and they're going to have to step up and do something about it, because they certainly put the issue loud and clearly that they didn't feel that their voice was being heard. And so it's up to them now to say, well, there you are, there is a board, a community board, and hopefully they will get together and say, let's look to see how we can get the best representation that will bring a voice into this council that actually clearly articulates what their issues are and some of the expectations about how we're going to address those. So that's what we had to do. So we did look at it long and hard and came up with this, expecting them to step up.
It's very similar, Councillor Weber, to the Lakes Community Board that sought out priorities to bring to the table. They managed to work out the priorities.
Yes, I just sort of see the Lakes Community Board as being more of a narrow geographical band to date. In the future may not be, but
Well,
to date.
they represent lakeside dwellers, which are all around the community. We have many lakes.
And well, okay. That's the intention, I guess. So I just had another question. So are there restrictions on who can stand in a community board? Like, for example, at the moment, you could stand in Rotorua. You might not necessarily live here, and we know that's all around the country. Do you have to live in the community board area? Are there restrictions on that? I mean, because these things could come up.
What we're considering today is not those specifics. They're interesting, and they are debatable points. But we're looking, if you look at the resolution, is that we take a recommendation from a working party. Councillor Donaldson. Sorry.
Yeah, I can answer that. You don't have to live in a community board area to stand, and we had a non-resident of the Lakes area stand for the Lakes Community Board. You only have to be nominated by two people resident in the community board area to stand. So a retired cocky in town could have two farmers in the rural area put him up to stand, for example. Yeah.
Issues that I think come out when this goes out to the community.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I like the idea that we're going to vote on this, but I think that what we should be stressing when we take it out for public consultation is, yes, we've got the Mayor and 10 councillors. The Lakes Community Board, a member, has a voting right. The Rural Community Board has a voter, whether it's the chair or the nominee. But you've also haven't put anything down here about the 2 Tiara representatives, and I think that should be included if we're going to go out for the public.
To answer that, JP, it seems quite a separate process actually that we've had.
Your Worship, it touches on the scope of the working party. So what the working party has done is work within their remit, which is, when you look at it up there on the screen under point 2, is extremely narrow. But as discussed, they've gone further and made some recommendations, and it is their recommendations they're putting to you to confirm. So again, you're not bound by those things that are outside of what you're agreeing to today. It's just part of that discussion within the community, and so their recommendation about the chairs of those community boards being part of committees in the future is entirely up to the next council. So it's not dependent on this consultation process. It's dependent on the decision making of the incoming council. So again, it's just them highlighting that if council is clear about its involvement and about getting that rural voice, protecting the lakes voice, and giving more say at a locality base, there is a number of recommendations or suggestions they are making. And maybe it's a case of actually rephrasing them as suggestions as opposed to recommendations, because we confuse the two things. The recommendations that the working party is putting to you are on the screen, and that's their remit.
McVicker?
That there could potentially be 14 members with voting rights sitting around the council table.
Around the committee table, only committee, yeah. Yeah, with recommendatory powers to council. That's right. No. 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 You can't delegate that. All right, questions seem to be asked. Oh, yes, Councillor Stewart.
I actually was a little bit reticent to be part of this working party because my well-known views on community boards were well known. However, I had to park my own personal views and actually get out there in the community. And I well remember Aroha Bray freezing herself, sitting at the craft market, going down to the Currao market with Jill. Jill was the best salesperson we had at the library and all around the community. These items under the 3 bullet dots have come from the most extensive set of consultation that I've ever been part of, and I think it is reflective. Certainly the Lakes Community Board, Lakes Community wanted Lakes wards, but we had 2 options open to us. Rural wards, a combination of rural urban wards or community boards. The numbers didn't stack up in terms of having 2 rural elected members. So that's the reason why we've come up with this. I'm delighted that when we started this process, Madam Chair, that we weren't hamstrung by the legislation. We went out and asked for the pure feedback from the community. We didn't go out to the community and say, because of the legislation, you can't tell us that you want this or you can't tell us you want that. It was a pure process. Then after we met you last time with the forum, then we engaged the legislation to see what would fit. Because what happens is, this process, no matter what we go out to the community with, is appealable to the Local Government Commission. And if we've got it wrong, and Una and her team and their staff, and I congratulate them all, have tried to make things fit around what the community want. Not what we as councillors have wanted, but what the working party wanted. And I pay tribute to the 6 other 5 that were on it, because we had many lengthy, robust comments along similar lines to what you were talking about, Councillor Kent. We certainly got the message, didn't we, Metapeka, regarding rural disconnect. At large was preferred by the whole community. They did not want the old ward system to go back to the old ward system. But one of the messages we got loud and clear is don't create another community board and don't give it any powers. Don't just let it be a puppet on a string. Give it some real meaning. And one of the other things we took from the forum that we had with you last time is that with the portfolios, and Metapeka brushed on it earlier, with the portfolios now coming into vogue in terms of their success and engaging at the grassroots level, we believe a portfolio probably should be community boards. So that one member of the 10, each of us will be delegated portfolios, and one of the portfolios may very well be your portfolio's liaison with community boards, even though, as in the questions that Councillor McVicker raised, even though both community board chairs may have a say, and that's to be decided later on, it's not part of this process, may have a say at the committee level. But that is a bit of work after the next election, which the Mayor has the power to appoint and to allocate the different portfolios. But that was our thinking, Madam Chair. The question that Councillor Kent raised regarding the cost, we were mindful of the cost. We didn't want 12 councillors and another community board on top of the cost to the ratepayers. So we worked it out as Una illustrated. 2 councillors was $80,000. The cost of the wages, that was the wages for the councillors, not the staff costs of the councillors. So we didn't, I didn't want to factor that in. But the $80,000, say $40,000 per councillor, cut that, that's $80,000. Look at the costs of the chair and 3 other members, because the councillor doesn't get paid. That's where we got the net saving of wages for elected representatives, Councillor Kent, at $52,000. And I think that we were very mindful that there was an extra cost incurred. Reassessing the delegations and the powers is a key for me. I want to see these community boards effective, but as I said, that will happen later. And the linkages direct to the council committees was something that it's no use giving people a say and then ignoring them all the time. I mean, there will be robust debate in terms of whether we agree or we don't agree, and we do that anyway. But don't set up something and then just ignore it. And that's the point that was made to us. So, Madam Chair, with that, I implore my colleagues to support this. Let this go out to public consultation. We will get a chance if we've got it wrong, but let's go out with it to the community. Let the community tell us that we've got it wrong, because we do have an opportunity to alter this before it goes to the Commission. But once it goes to the Commission, we have our role and our job is finished. Thank you, Madam Chair. And before I finish, I just want to pay tribute to Metapeka. Metapeka, as you know, is a very busy person. We even had conference calls on the phone, and the committee and Councillor Rotorua Tate was determined to chair it, and to chair it from afar, but our discussions weren't hindered at all. So I just wanted, and I also want to pay tribute to you, Una, and your team, Rick, and JP, for the work that you've done, because it has been quite involved. Thank you.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Worship. Look, I would like to add my voice in support, and also commend the working party on grappling with a very, very complex task. I'm particularly pleased to see the alteration to the Lakes Community Board area. At every Lakes Water Quality AGM, they always ask for where is the voice for Lake Rotorua. So great to see Hamarana, I'm not quite sure if it extends to Awaho, but see Hamarana community added in there. And look, I'm relaxed about the rural community having a wide geographical spread, because the lakes have traditionally had one member from each of 4 lakes on their board, and they all have distinct interests affecting those little lakeside communities, but they get together as a team and consider the whole lakes community issues and bring back a position. And really, I guess the rural, proposed rural community board area is the same. It's more of an economic group community of interest, but I'm sure that they will sort themselves out as to who their appropriate representatives would be if this goes through, and they'll come with a combined view for all of the rural communities. So just with those few words, I fully support the proposal.
Thank you. I support the proposal. I think that those communities, the rural, the lakes and Te Arawa, they all get to vote for their boards. They also get to vote for everyone at large, and there is absolutely nothing stopping anyone in those communities for also standing for full council. We may find that 5 people in the rural area decide also to stand for full council and they have a community board. Good on them if they do that, or the lakes. So this is going to add the much needed strength to our community. We've seen where the gaps lie and the underrepresentation, and this is an opportunity for the community to say, have we got it right? The real strength for me with this proposal is that it was co-created with the community. The strength is the working party, and that they have already been out in that pre-consultation phase. They've been seen by the public, and the public know that they have had a part in this. So I fully support this going out, and I look with interest to see what comes back from the community. And well done.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a fantastic proposal which the Working Party have come back to full council with. At least it gives the opportunity of the Lakes Community Board to be represented. It also gives a very good opportunity for the Rural Community Board to be represented and ask questions through the Community Board coming back to full council. They will see how difficult it is to do budgets, where the money is coming from and everything like that. But I strongly recommend that today you've mentioned 1 councillor per community board. May I point out in the last Lakes Community Board we had 2 council appointed board members at the meeting, but the previous 3 meetings we had 1. We need 2 councillors per board so that the people feel that they can got a better say with council. You know, they know if they've got an issue, they can go to one of their council appointees and say, hey, there's a problem with this particular area, can you please mention it? And if it requires a seconder at council to move a recommendation, well then they have 2 people. The other thing is that any ratepayer can contact any councillor. Their phone numbers are listed in the blue phone book 2015, except for mine. It's a printing mistake. I've got 6 digits.
We probably need to get back to this proposal, but
but let's go forward. Let's go out there, get it published, and get feedback from the ratepayers, and let them decide what course of action they want to be done, and then we can hear their opinions, and then make a decision accordingly, and go to the central government at Wellington and say, well, this is the recommendation from the Lakes Rotorua Council. Thank you.
great. Councillor Kent and then Councillor Whipper.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And first, just to put a very quick response to the slide digs I keep getting about my having missed a few meetings. The member for Warkworth is shortly going to be the member for Brunswick. Moving on from that, I support in principle what the Working Party has come up with. I firmly believe that our rural community has not had the say. I firmly believe, in fact, that our Lakes Community Board has not had the say it should have had either. Basically, because the problem being they're not listened to enough. And I think that is wrong with, what is wrong with the relationship between this council and the community is we haven't been listening enough. So I'm pleased to see that, yes, we're looking at a rural community board. I support that wholeheartedly. I'm very pleased to see that Lakes Community Board is being retained, and I support that wholeheartedly. And I have enjoyed working with them and achieving things with them. I have some questions over the number of councillors, but that's for the community to decide, because personally I can't see why 6,500 per councillor is any more fair a number than 5,000 per councillor, because they're exactly the same to me. It comes down to what the community wants and feels is correct to represent them, get their views and their ideas actually listened to by this council. So yes, I support this going out to the community, and I look forward to hearing the responses.
I too support this. I want to congratulate the Working Party and the support that they have had. I think it's been a genuine partnership, and it's this new style of engagement with the community. they've fed back the pulse of our community, really. They've told us what the community has felt, and we're beholden to listen to that. I'm interested in these locational councillors because I understood that's what buddy councillors were, that would have that relationship with the different communities of interest, but clearly that hasn't worked. So the next council will have to look at how we develop those relationships with those communities of interest. I think that's very, very important. But I've liked the fact that the working party was equal, split, 3 councillors, 3 community representatives, and I hear they've got so excited. I know, Aroha, you're here, but they're saying give us another job because they enjoyed going out to meet the community, and if you could feed that back, Aroha, I think it was very cool to see them running around all of you. That's actually councillors' role, but how good to have community members that were interested to work alongside of councillors and well supported by our executive. This is very innovative and it's new, and I think that's what a council should be doing all the time, to refresh themselves and to refresh, have we got it right for our communities, because communities change over time, and I think this is a great recommendation to take out to our community, and well done. So, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Congratulations, and I think all the thanks have been given, but nice to have you here too as a Lakes Community Board.
To the community members on the working party, particularly Aroha, Brian Eagle and Jill Nicholas. Thank you, Mark.
Recommendation 3, page 26 of your, well, it begins at 26, the report, and the recommendations that we'll be considering are page 29. So we should take the report as a whole. Do I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Thank you. And seconded Councillor Road Kawatate. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried. We now move to items 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. And JP, you're going to, let's see, Una's gone, but JP is going to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've got a short presentation which really will lead you through the main issues in this proposal. So hopefully that gives you confidence around what is a fairly complicated report and a much longer resolution than certainly the previous one. So councillors, what I'd like to do in this presentation is really cover off these 4 critical aspects. So what I've got coming up is just an explanation about that separation that we've identified around RMA decision making. Really talk about the specifics around the role of councillors. When we last discussed this item, there was a number of interpretations about the role of councillors. So really I'd like to put on the table here some specific recognition of the 2 key roles and the roles of council around those 2 aspects. The proposed structure, which forms the basis of this report, and really following on from some of the discussion previously, the cost and the effectiveness of this kind of proposal. So councillor, as you're aware, and the report identifies this, there's 2 main parts around the RMA decision making. And we've identified this really as that strategic land use planning decisions, and really that means about working on the district plan or altering the district plan. So that's our strategic land use document, so really focusing in on that space. On the other side is the application of that district plan. The consent hearings around individual properties or deviations from the rules and the objectives was set in the district plan. So really that's the operational side of the equation. So councillors, when you start reflecting then on, so what are the skills and experience that needs to be brought to bear on those two aspects of what is undertaken under RMA decision making? So clearly, and it's identified on both sides there, is a knowledge of the RMA. It's an incredibly complicated piece of legislation with a huge amount of case law backing it up. So really knowledge of the RMA is incredibly important in making decisions on both sides of that RMA decision-making process, the strategic level and the operational level. And really that experience or knowledge of the RMA is really now encapsulated in the requirement around accreditation, so accredited commissioner training. So and that goes further into chairing qualifications as well. So on the left-hand side, I've also identified the district plan, but that's the district plan as in forming the district plan as opposed to implementing or applying it to individual consents. So councillors, what we're really saying there is in setting that district plan at a strategic level and talking about land use for the future of this district, it's about how that supports the aspirations, expectations and the context for our community. What are we trying to achieve within the Rotorua Lakes? And that's why just on the side I've put that little arrow pointing upwards from a political overlay, because that knowledge is where councillors can understand what our community's seeking to achieve and bring that in appropriately in the objectives and the rules of our district plan. So hence the review process comment off to the side. Now councillors, there was a discussion about why are we talking about this now? Well, we're in a place where we haven't been for upward of 15 years. We've had a proposed district plan and we're now moving into a situation where we have an operative district plan. So for the first time in at least the last 15 years, our community has a very clear view of that political overlay as it's fed into that district plan. So they understand how you have brought their views and aspirations and placed those within our district plan document. So that's a very important point in time. On the other side of the equation, you can see there that it's the application. So this is back into that quasi-judicial role. So at this point, you're making judgments about individual consents and how they comply or don't comply with the rules that have been articulated within that district plan. So it's a spot issue. So an understanding of the district plan is very important and its context, but here it's about the application of those rules specifically to those judgments. Now the next slide, councillor, then, and it just follows on from my comment about the community understanding what our objectives are in that community context. Because for the first time, we're in a place where our community certainly understands politically what's led and the directions and the choices that are identified in that district plan, and they have a very clear view of those. Now, when you take that across to the other side and you start making judgments against that district plan, that's the opportunity or the risk that we see with our community, that they see a real or a perceived risk. Now, I'll use a couple of examples just to highlight that, and it really does come down to the point of time that we're in. Cookson Road is an example. So we had an application to do a subdivision in Cookson Road. We had an officer recommendations that said one particular course of action. We had our councillor commissioners decide a different course of action. Now that was appealed then to the Environment Court, so that went through a process. Now what came out of that is that when we came time to undertaking or making decisions around the rules in the district plan in that space, there was a careful consideration by our councillors about whether they might be interpreted as having some sort of preconceived or predetermined view or bias, and so they chose to not take part in the hearings on that element of the district plan. So an independent commissioner was used to undertake that part of the district plan hearings. So that's an example of where we have to be sensitive about the decisions that have been made, certainly within the review process, but how that now leads into an operational perspective. So this is actually back during the preparation of the district plan. Councillors, subsequent to the district plan moving from being proposed to more operative, our community has, as I said, has a very clear view of what our objectives are for our city and what our aspirations are for our city. So we're increasingly seeing applicants coming forward with a view as to a real or perceived bias by our commissioners in the application of those rules. So we're getting more inquiries about using independent commissioners to hear consent applications that they believe will not be seen favourably because of the decisions we've made around our district plan. So we're in a very unique position at this time. And again, I would like to restate, that's because it's been very clearly set out through that proposed district plan what we're trying to achieve. And that's led also into Rotorua 2030 and our focus on the inner city. So for applicants who choose or are seeking to do something different, they have a very clear view of what that political overlay looks like, and that's driving certain decisions by them as applicants. So again, and I will stress the real or perceived, that is the issue at that point. There may not be a real bias in that, but there is a perceived bias in that. So they're actually driving decisions in certain directions. So again, councillors, that's really the two decision-making arms that we've got there in the RMA process, and also identifying the skills and knowledge on each side. And as was raised last time, the appropriateness of that strong political overlay, certainly in the formation of our district plan, to support what we're trying to achieve strategically for our community. So again, this slide, councillors, just brings into, I suppose in a simple way, what I see as the key roles identified for councillors in this proposal. So as I've said previously, this is bringing context, direction and an identification and understanding of the community's aspirations into the policy setting framework. And that's really understanding what that means for district plan, variations to the district plan, and certainly forward into the rolling reviews of our district plan, the rule books for our community. The second part that we see as being incredibly important and has been strengthened since the previous report based on some of your feedback was to ensure that the operationalisation of those strategic directions are robust and accountable to you as elected members. So what does that specifically mean? So I've covered off some of these aspects, councillors, but obviously it relates to bringing that context to district plan reviews, the rolling reviews, understanding the demand pressures and what that might mean to how we undertake those rolling reviews, monitoring and SOE's state of the environment reporting, and also plan changes, etc. Now, what's also envisaged in councillors' role around this is also to ensure that robust and accountable process. So for us in considering the independent commissioner panel, it's that reviewing and agreeing the expression of interest criteria. So how are we going to measure the performance or the framework to test the qualifications of this independent commissioner board? Evaluation and appointment of that, so that's the recommendations from councillors to council to delegate powers to panel members, the determination of the use of panel members, and ultimately also the monitoring of the use and their performance. So this is another aspect that has enabled us to strengthen that view into the process. So councillors, this is why this report through recommendation 1 to 6 looks at that separation of those two key functions. So as you can see from the report and the terms of reference, we're proposing an RMA policy committee which involves 2 councillor commissioners, Councillor Hunt and Councillor Wepper as the experienced councillors in that space and who have been there consistently through the preparation of the district plan. Councillor Hunt as chair is the only qualified chair we have. And councillor, you also have to remember where this process started. This started with the Te Arawa proposal. And in that time, Te Arawa asked to have a 1/3 involvement within the hearing space. So what's been proposed here is really an interpretation of what they asked for, which was that appropriate seat at the table for the right discussions. So that RMA policy committee is proposing to include a Te Arawa recommended appointee, so a representative, to provide that Te Arawa perspective at the right discussions. So that's part of that context and community aspirations, which needs to come into our understanding and our evolution of our district plan. On the other side, what's proposed in this report is up to 10 independent commissioners that have gone through an expressions of interest and appointment process. So the key aspects here are independence, and I've tried to highlight the separation then of that political overview of what we're trying to do strategically from operational delivery, professionalism, and obviously the ultimate part of that is non-political. So that's the angle we're trying to take into that space. Te Arawa, again, this modifies what Te Arawa had identified, which is how does Te Arawa involvement take place in this space, and what we're trying to put forward here, and I've put it in brackets, is that Te Arawa in their proposal wanted the confidence that the hearings would reflect their views and their understanding in that community context. So what we've put forward here is their involvement in the selection of those independent commissioners. So that should give them confidence and also confidence for our community. So that's the basis of this report's recommendations. Councillor, I'd also highlight too that based on what we've seen in Auckland and Hamilton, for example, where they've had panels of up to 10, we don't need to appoint all 10. If we find there's 5 that we think are credible applicants, then that may be sufficient for our current consent numbers, but that gives us the opportunity to add if required, or if there's availability issues, we could go further and again seek further nominations. But this report is really focused on the up to 10. So, councillors, one of the issues that was raised when we presented this report previously was this concern about that councillor involvement in the selection process. So what I've just highlighted here, and I've repeated it in the report, is the strengthening of the elected members' involvement in the selection, appointment and use of an independent commissioner panel, which was certainly an issue raised by Councillor Sarank. So previously we've identified that officers would put forward the criteria. We're now saying that that would be checked with a panel which involves the two elected councillor members of the RMA Policy Committee, so they would agree the criteria. Those same 2 elected councillor members of the RMA Policy Committee would also be involved in evaluating any expressions of interest, so that when the council had the recommendations for that panel before them, it would have been based on the recommendations that would have come from those 2 councillors involved as well. So they should have confidence then that councillors have been involved in those 3 steps before it comes to council. Another change which was expression of concern was around the use and of the independent panel once they were in place, where the Chief Operating Officer would determine which of the independent commissioners would be used for each consent hearing. So what we've added there, that it would actually be a role for the Chair of the RMA Policy Committee, so Councillor Hunt, and the Chief Operating Officer to determine which was the most appropriate commissioner based on their experience and skills to use for any resource consent hearing. So that's added in again, that issue. And finally, the RMA Policy Committee, which of course also includes the iwi representative, was to monitor that overall use of the panel members, but also to understand and review their performance. And this is critical again. This is an opportunity if those panel members are not performing or are not providing the advice and the certainty around decision making that our councillors expect, that committee would be recommending to council their removal from the panel or reduction in their use. So councillors, that's really the intent there that has come through from the previous discussion, to strengthen that involvement of the RMA Policy Committee councillors. So councillors, there was a considerable discussion at our last meeting about how the proposed process would differ from what we currently do. So I've included this diagram in the report, but if I just step you through it. So the current approach, and we've got an applicant here and their consent application. Now they have two choices under our current framework. If it's a notified resource consent that requires a hearing, it would go through to our current 3-councillor panel, or under section 100A, they can request an independent be appointed to hear their application. Councillors, as I've said, there's an increasing number of inquiries coming through based on our very clear strategic direction for this council and from our new district plan to explore that option. So, councillors, there were some inquiries as to the costs of our current operation versus the costs of the proposed operation. So you can see there that those are the costs currently of an elected councillor chair and an elected councillor commission to sit on a panel. So, and we use 3. So that works out to be $260 per hour. Now there's 3 key phases to sort of the hearing process. That's the preparation for the hearing itself, and then obviously the writing up of the decision or the decision reports. Councillors, there's been some recent changes to allow elected members to charge for these 2 parts, preparation and decision making, pretty much on the same basis or on the same basis as an independent commissioner. So I think the wording specifically says that the amount of time for a hearing can then be used to also charge back against preparation and decision making. So we have a $260 per hour costs around our hearing process.
Inform councillors that our commissioners have never charged for preparation. Our time is based merely on the time that we hear the case and then the time that we take to make a decision. But never have we charged for preparation, which can be considerable.
And yeah. So what's envisaged in the use of this new independent commissioner panel, councillors, is the application is being processed and there's a decision that as a notified consent it needs to go to a hearing. The chair of the RMA Policy Committee, so that's Councillor Hunt, and the Chief Operating Officer, Dave Foster, make a decision as to the complexity or the type of the application, and based on availability, determine which of our commissioners will hear that application. Yes. The intention and the way that certainly Auckland, Hamilton, and a slightly different set of circumstances in Christchurch, it operates is that a single commissioner who's also trained as a chair would hear that. So we've got one person involved in hearing that application. Now the example I've used in the report, councillors, is Hamilton City. And Hamilton City, when they went to the expressions of interest process, they set a cap on the hourly rate for commissioners to form part of that panel. And that was $160 plus GST. So that became their upper limit of what they were prepared to pay for those who were putting forward their expressions of interest. There was some worry at that time that that would not net them the quality of commissioners, but what they found was that for the consistency of work, this is like a preferred supplier list, those commissioners actually dropped their normal rate to meet that cap. So that's been the cap applied to Hamilton City. So that just gives you an idea of those costs. Now, Councillor Sarank raised an important point there, because at this stage these costs are not passed directly to the applicant. Those are costs we charge to our ratepayer. So those are costs that are absorbed through our organisation because it's not just about the applicant. It's actually about having
Excuse me, in that case, can I apply for a refund?
Point of order. If you just carry on, please, JP.
Councillor, my understanding is that we charge a proportion of those costs. The rest are picked up by the general rate. And that's really recognising that there is a public good in this process as well. It's not just about the applicant, it's actually about the community knowing that there is a fair hearing process around this. So I've tried to cite the example of Hamilton, councillors. There was some slight differences in what was discussed in Auckland, and there's variations on the theme applied in other parts of the country as well. And I really didn't go into much detail other than seeing that there was other ways it was applied or variations. So I just honed in on the Hamilton example because they are close, and potentially we would be pulling on the same pool of trained commissioners in the Waikato and Bay of Plenty to this process. So what Hamilton is finding is it is costing them less. And mainly that relates to less time in what I've included here, which is in the decision report writing phase. So they see less officer involvement and support provided into the decision-making period, and also quicker turnaround in the reports being produced by those commissioners. Clearly, when we involve elected members, they have other important governance duties within our organisation. So again, it's that pressure of time. So those commissioners are paid specifically for a hearing, and there's an expectation of the turnaround. So for Hamilton, again, they've seen less cost and less cost to their ratepayers. In our circumstances, that would be less to the ratepayers and less to the applicant in those support and administration charges. They've also cited better reports, and again that relates to the quality of the commissioners they've been lucky enough to attract into their pool. And for them, that's translated, in their view, into lower risk. Now, that's very hard to quantify or talk around, but they've seen a reduction in the conditions set on in decision-making reports, and again, it's anecdotal, but they've said less environment court time defending decisions made by commissioners. So they're very pleased with where they've moved to with their panel. So, councillors, what I've sought to just cover in this quite short presentation is really, again, just honing in on those two arms of that RMA decision making. So the operational side around hearing individual consents and applying the rules at an individual application level versus that strategic direction, strategic policy setting area, which absolutely must involve that political overlay about what we're trying to achieve for our community. So again, councillors, that really comes down from those two arms, strategic and operational, into what we've tried to clarify in our view through this report as the key roles of elected members, providing that overlay and that knowledge, but also ensuring the robustness of its application. Councillors, I've touched again on that proposed structure, and to a degree it relates to some of the good practice we're seeing around the country, but also to that systematic separation we've achieved through the organisation and intergovernance of strategy and operations, but also, and most importantly here, also incorporating the intent of the Te Arawa model or Te Arawa proposal into having a seat at the table where it's applicable and right, but also providing confidence in knowing that the proposed panel members are effective in understanding or applying that Te Arawa or Māori perspective to decision making. And councillors, in the report, again, I've cited the differences in costs. They're not huge, but certainly from the Hamilton experience, there's clearly some improvements around the effectiveness of those decision-making processes and how their panel has helped them achieve those. So really that's the key elements of that Hamilton example. So councillors, as I say, the recommendation encapsulates all of those aspects. So part 2 sets up the RMA Policy Committee and parts 3 to 6 of the recommendation begins the process around establishing that independent commissioner panel. So happy to answer any questions on the report or the presentation.
And are there any questions? Thank you for that. And it also actually it puts the right information before councillors and the public, because there was clearly some misinformation. So it's great to have a comprehensive set of information. Questions, Councillor Stewart?
Just point of clarification, actually, Madam Chair. I just want to know how you intend to handle the recommendations. Do you do 2 separate from 3, 4, 5 and 6? Because I think I've got a couple of amendments that I think will tidy it up and give more accountability, so I just wondered what you were going to do.
The intent was that we took 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 together. So if you have any clarification of amendments, now would be the time to put them on the table.
I signal that I will be moving some amendments, but Madam Chair, in terms, are we asking questions now and then going to debate? Okay. So I'm actually delighted that the report did lay on the table, because it's clarified a lot of things for me. The clear delineation between the RMA policy setting role and the independence required to implement that policy has now got checks and balances that it didn't have before, i.e. the chair of the RMA committee has an integral role with the CCO in allocating a commissioner based on their experience and their track record, etc., in terms of that type of hearing. So that has been a good move, Madam Chair, I think. That was the intention of bringing it back.
Your Worship, yes, that certainly was a strong signal I took from the last presentation of this item, and really just expanding on what Councillor Stewart has said. One of the things that we'll be looking for in the expressions of interest is any other skills that are relevant and will add to the quality of the decision making. So whether that's a professional planning background or an engineering background, say for example we were looking at sewage schemes, we may end up deciding that would be the right panellist to apply to a consent around sewage schemes, for example. So there's a range of issues that might come into how the chair plus the chief operating officer would choose or apply the panellists to the right application. So hopefully that reassures the council.
One other ambiguous situation, Madam Chair, is, and I think this is crucial to why I haven't signalled the amendments, because the answer to this question is crucial from my point of view. The hearings panel of commissioners, if there's only one of them selected, well, all of them have to be accredited and trained as chairs. Is that the case?
There is a preferred element to that. We're probably looking at, and so one of the discussions we had with Hamilton and certainly with our staff internally, and I've talked a lot with Dave's staff about this, that they certainly saw the likelihood that if we have a higher proportion of chair qualified panel members, they would get the majority of the work, because for probably 90+% of the resource consent applications it would be sufficient to use just one. There may be situations where for an extremely complicated or multifaceted type applications or joint applications we may have more than one, at which point you're correct, we could then add to that panel some of the ones that were not chair accredited, but as I say, the majority of the work would go to chair accredited panellists.
Now that you've answered that, will that be difficult to get 10 such people?
Again, the comment here is we've said up to 10, so if we get 4, 5, 6 that are available, and available well enough for us to undertake those hearings, then we should be adequately covered. So, Councillor, it really is a bit of a judgment call as to a good number for us to work with initially, and if we find that we need additional ones that weren't recruited in the first sort of expressions of interest process, we can certainly go back out to the market again and try and add to that. But certainly the expectation that based on our numbers, we could probably get away with somewhere between 4 and 6 at this stage, as long as we have a good proportion of those who are chair trained. Councillors, and just as a sideline, there is the separate legislative requirements we have around our JMAs, so with the Te Arawa River Iwi Trust, that they have the ability to request that they can put forward a commissioner to hear certain things within their areas. So the key for this is that we do not exclude that. Well, obviously we can't because it's in legislation. So the flexibility we have then is that if they have a consent within the Waikato River area and they feel that they need to put forward a commissioner, what we're hoping is that through this process and through Te Arawa involvement in this process, they will see no need to put forward an additional commissioner to be heard as part of, to be involved in those hearings. Again, these are probably the exceptions rather than the rules. So at this stage, the expectation is that 90% plus of hearings would be heard by one commissioner.
The other question, final question I have, Madam Chair, is under number 3. The Independent Hearing Commissioners panel cannot change the policies that have been implemented by the RMA committee. They can only interpret those policies. Is that correct?
That's correct. And one of the things that we would do, and in the report, again, this adds to the complexity of it, is that after the evaluation group has come together and reviewed those expressions of interest, they will be putting forward to council the recommended panel members, because at council you will need to delegate specific powers to the members of that panel. So that will come before you, and we will have to itemise the powers that have been delegated to those panel members for them to undertake those RMA functions on your behalf. And again, the checks and balances there is the use determined by the chair and the chief operating officer, and also the RMA policies committee's monitoring of their use and their performance.
Question for me. So who's responsible for the monitoring?
It would be the RMA Policy Committee. So one of the things that we would be doing with that RMA Policy Committee on maybe the quarterly agenda is to identify how many hearings were undertaken, what panel members were used, why they were used, and also any views on the performance of those panel members. If there was concerns raised by or into that RMA Policy Committee, and there was a decision that some sort of action was required, say the removal of that panel member, that would be a recommendation of the RMA Policy Committee to Council.
That's the council oversight that you were seeking. Any further questions before I signal that we'll put resolutions 2 to 6 and then open for debate? Councillor Sereng.
1 or 2 questions, Your Worship. Was any consideration given to adding just the iwi representation to our present statutory hearings committee, of whom all are qualified commissioners, and we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 qualified commissioners, and as you can see from this paper, only 2 will be used in any capacity. So was any consideration given to that being done? And I asked the question because there's been this talk of bias towards our own plan. But I would remind you that I can't even count on one hand the number of times we've gone to the Environment Court. I think once in the last 4 years. Remember that the visits to the Environment Court by this council have not come through the Statutory Hearings Committee. They have come through matters quite apart from anything to do with the Statutory Hearings Committee. So we have a very fine record of not very often being taken to the Environment Court. And I would remind JP that a sewerage scheme, for example, is not heard under the RMA. It's heard under council people listening to that. It's got nothing to do with the RMA. So once again, that was a furore in the Environment Court, but it was not caused by your commissioners sitting on the hearings panel. So I have that question, and the other question regarding the independent commissioners, I presume that would eliminate any local residents who are qualified under the RMA, because would they not be accused of the same bias?
Councillor, just picking up on probably the second one first, no, it wouldn't preclude anyone locally. And the reason why I say that is what I showed you in the slides was the view about the decisions that collectively or individually you've made through that district plan process. So that is the political oversight. For a trained commissioner who simply lives in our district, they haven't been part of that decision making. If anything, there's an advantage because they would also have a good understanding of our community geographically and demographically. So they might actually be of more value to us in the application. So no, it does not preclude them. As far as other options are concerned, Councillor, if you refer to the report, and it's on page 30, bottom of page 36, and goes through to page 37. Councillor, if you remember, the issue that we had around Te Arawa involvement was really parked from the decisions you made around the Te Arawa proposal on the 26th of May. So what I've brought back in here is the specifics of the Te Arawa proposal as it was presented at the time. So that was one of the options that we've considered in this report. The alternative is not doing anything. So what I've done on page 37, councillors, is identify the option that I've put forward in this report for you, the option that came directly through the Te Arawa proposal, and the do nothing option. Now down the left hand side, you'll recall that when we did the analysis of the many submissions we received, we came up with a list of themes, and we used those to really evaluate the different options against that. Now, if you recall back to the 26th of May, councillors, that included the alternative model being put forward by another group within our community. So we tried to identify those themes. So to be consistent with where this report has originally come from, I've maintained that link to those key themes. So, councillor, yes, we did evaluate against simply doing as Te Arawa had asked, which is add one person to the Statutory Hearings Committee. But again, I do not believe it addresses those themes as effectively as what's being proposed here, which equally was a view that some felt that Te Arawa would introduce a bias to the Statutory Hearing Committee. So we've tried very hard to separate out where the political view is important and the context is important from the application and the independence of the application of those rules. So that's why we believe that's a stronger option.
Plan hearings, we had a Te Arawa representative in the sections that were appropriate, and they sat with Councillor Hunt, Councillor Wepper and myself, and it went very well indeed. It was very appropriate and it was successful. So that is why I say, why can't it be that way? Because in that case you have the constant presence of Te Arawa there, and it works. In this model, when you've got one commissioner, you don't have an iwi rep as well, do you? No.
Councillor,
that is what Te Arawa asked for.
Yes, and Councillor, I'm just, I'm just a bit confused with that, because that is what's proposed in the RMA Policy Committee, is that the Te Arawa rep sits at the table and forms part of that committee at all the time, doing what you described, which is being involved in the district. No, but not on the hearings. No. But this is that separation about where is the right discussions to be held. It's not on spot hearings, it's on the rule setting and the context. So that's the RMA policy side. What we've included here and what we believe is important for Te Arawa is that they have confidence that the independent commissioner panel will understand and appropriately apply the treaty and an understanding of Te Arawa issues to their deliberations. So that's why they're involved in the selection panel of that independent panel.
Microphone on, Councillor.
Was our concern the fact that political overlay on the district plan issues? And I get the impression that we councillors are certainly being devoided, if that's the right word, of any future decision making regarding the district plan in the future, the rolling checks and all the rest of it. Can you comment on that first and give us some assurance that we will still have some input into the formation of the district plan?
JP Jeff wants to give this answer.
Not sure if I want to, but through you, Your Worship, I think just trying to help JP with regards to the explanation. What JP has presented is that there are two quite different roles and responsibilities around the RMA process. The first being, as you quite rightly point out, the direction and the nature of the district plan. And that will be determined by council and by the councillors with regard to the committee, as it actually has been all the way through. Well, it would be, you would expect that just like the process that we've used to date, you would have a dialogue and some discussion between the council and the committee that is set up to look at the direction and the operation of the district plan. That's the nature of what we've done to date, and I wouldn't see that that would actually change out into the future. Where it actually takes a different direction is when you start looking at an individual application, and can that be permitted under the district plan that you have agreed on. Now that's the different environment. That is quasi-judicial, and the political overlay, the introduction of material that is not actually introduced into that consenting application nor through the parties who have actually objected or submitted. The introduction of additional material is where allegations of bias come, because that is quasi-judicial. It should be based on the evidence that has been put before the commissioners in the consent, in the submitters, and in the district plan. And so that role is really quite a constrained role as opposed to that broader direction. So I think what JP may want to add to this, I think what we've really tried to do, and what staff have tried to do, is to retain effectively that oversight as it has been provided to date, with very little change, I think, in fact, to it. You've still got a committee with a chair, with a councillor who will be, you'd expect, linking back to the council on matters with respect to the direction and operation of the district plan. That is the political direction that's required.
Madam Chair, and that relates to the hearing process, and you've partly answered it, I think, and the fact that one independent commissioner rather than three wise heads that we have traditionally used for the last 15, 20 years, which to most people's mind has not tipped over, hasn't, not succeeded. So I'm just sceptical as to whether, and I'd be interested from my colleagues, as to whether they believe one independent commissioner can do the work of three commissioners representing the more the political arm of council.
You directed that question to your colleagues who have sat on the hearing panel rather than me.
That's not a question to JP. He's speaking to the paper and the proposal.
In a way, because you've got a complete change here proposed. There has to be some sort of feeling of that the hearings committee has not functioned properly for this whole change to come about.
I don't feel that it's what we're
exactly.
discussing at all. It's not looking in the past. This is about,
Councillor.
Can I just add a sort of, I think, a comment? JP alluded to the fact that you have been operating in a rather unusual environment and that you've spent, I think it's more than 15 years or thereabouts, on the formulation of a new district plan. Within that context, you have actually had to, when you've actually had a consent being submitted, you have had to actually provide a level of political overlay. You know, clearly in the formation of a new district plan, you are signalling that there is change happening. But now you've got a new district plan. That's the whole point. That is not up for debate. It is actually when a consenter consents and looks to try and do something in the district, this is not a matter that they want to go back to a political discussion with, because they want the certainty of a district plan that actually outlines the requirements and what can be done, what can't be done. Then what you're dealing with regards to consent decision making is a pure quasi-judicial environment to say, well, here are the conditions, here is the direction the council's provided. Does this consent meet this? And what are the views of those who are objecting or whatever, and how do they fit within this district plan? So that's quasi-judicial. So because of the changed nature of the environment, you've then got a totally different set of requirements with regard to the structure and the process that's needed to monitor the district plan going forward, but also to ensure a robust decision-making environment takes place.
And it's as grey as you can't ask what are the avoided costs when we've been given the costs, because we don't know. You've now got a district plan. Councillor Stewart, it's a...
So based on that answer, the most important input politically is at the policy level.
Absolutely.
So why we've got two? I mean, they have a disagreement. Does Councillor Hunt, well...
No, two and an iwi.
Yeah, two and an iwi, and it displaces the chair in a... Well, I don't think it's broad enough, and I'll be putting an amendment to increase the membership of that by one, because I think, I mean, you've got qualified commissioners, and what are we...
Won't go on to the amendments just
Okay.
yet.
Okay.
It's just further questions of clarification while JP's in the chair.
So, Madam Chair, just coming back to that answer that you just got, or that was just given, the independent commissioners, their job, it sounds like it's going to be few and far between, but when they were required, they're on their own. But I didn't think that was what Te Aroha wanted. The issues that I got from the TAPP was that we had spoken to the wrong people at the time of a hearing, or at the time of an application. In the Rotorua Rotorua case, and in the Taniwha Springs case.
Wasn't through this hearings process. Councillor, you're clearly confused. We've now got the district plan.
Yep.
This is about how we set the policy for the district plan,
Yes, the
set by
RMA committee is
councillors,
for the policy.
yeah,
Yep.
and set by councillors with a Te Aroha representative
Yep.
there, and then clearly separated out as how the hearings will, yeah. So that's what's the change here. But you are really verbalising some other people's confusion. But we've had great clarity back from council staff today. Are there any other questions? Councillor Gould.
Chair, recommendation 3, 1 to 6, we're voting for that in one hit, or can you separate it?
I've already indicated that we'll put 2, 3, 4 and 5 and 6 as one, and vote on that and then accept debate. You don't want to peel them out separately. They are a complete package. Yeah, one affects the other. Thank you. Second, thank you. Councillor Bentley, you had a further question, sorry.
I did, Madam Mayor, thank you. I've actually got 3 questions for JP. 50% of the decision making with regard to who's going to sit on these panels is going to be made up by COO. Is he accredited commissioner? And my second question is, your $160 per hour, I'm assuming that's per commissioner. And on your report, who approved your report?
That question I'll allow. This is a council officer report that's come to us as politicians, which is the right process.
Normally a report is approved by somebody.
And we're debating it politically. Can you answer the first 2 questions?
Your Worship, the sign-off through the Chief Operating Officer, he is clearly not accredited, but what he does have is a team of staff who are experts in the RMA process, who will be compiling and reviewing the applications as they come through, and will be able to highlight the issues. What we're expecting through the Chief Operating Officer with the Chair of the RMA Policy Committee is a decision based on information provided through our qualified and experienced staff and through the councillor's perspective, both as a qualified chair but also in her own capacity, having that political overlay as the appropriateness of any of those panel decisions. So I don't know if it's actually, the key here is the relevance of the Chief Operating Officer as an accredited RMA professional, and I don't believe that's actually necessary based on the fact that we have a skilled team and a consents manager who will be supporting that recommendation or that discussion with the chair.
I can clearly see some uncertainty, Councillor Sturt, and I'd rather you ask your questions through the chair. You felt that you didn't get your question answered. It's important we understand this because this is a change.
That's why I wanted it to lay on the table. I was pleased that you acquiesced, and we did so because we would have put through something that most of us didn't understand. But, Madam Chair, quite clearly, JP, you've divided the roles and responsibilities of the RMA Policy Committee, which I understand, Madam Chair, is going to have a rolling review of the district plan. Rather than doing it all in one hit like we've done in the past, it's taken 15 years to come to the stage it's at the moment. So what is wrong with, and I'll put it in an amendment shortly, what is wrong with the 5 members who are accredited now been on Policy Development Committee? Quite clearly they're not going to be involved in hearings.
Councillor,
so what's wrong with having the 5 that are accredited on that RMA Policy Development Committee?
Councillor,
why is it just down to 2?
What we've done is, if you think of the Statutory Hearing Committee, we've taken out the hearing of individual resource consent applications, which is a fairly small and minor element. So that's come out to be used for independent panels. The rolling review, Councillor, will still have hearing requirements in it. Because if we go out and do a rolling review, which involves something like the Lakes A zone or something like that, there will be a hearing element to it. And as a hearing process, they are trained commissioners with a trained chair. So it's a different cost than simply saying it's a committee where we can have 10 councillors and you're all on a salary. What you're doing in that situation is going back into a district plan hearing process where they are operating as commissioners. So the intention there was to say we've had 3 and they are paid. With this RMA Policy Committee, we've kept the numbers small, again for that specific reason that there is hearing components to it. Far smaller than what has currently been undertaken, and that was the intention about the rolling review, but there is a commissioner payment question involved in that. So if we add 2 more, we add another $80 per hour to that discussion. Again, for us, that was that balancing off of saying a keen interest in ensuring that we have the continuity, the quality, the experience, and we manage our costs through those kind of processes. Councillors, one of the things that you raised last time too was to make sure that, and we've included within the terms of reference here, is to make sure the invitations are extended to our other qualified councillors to attend the meetings, because what's important for any political environment is that continuity and that capacity moving through the next election and subsequent elections. So there was the invitation extended, or the suggestion that those members become sort of, I won't say ex officio, but to involve themselves in getting an understanding of what is actually going through those rolling reviews and through that committee, in case there is change after the next election or subsequent elections. Because really one of the issues we've got is we've got some 3 highly skilled, experienced councillors in that space and 3 reasonably newly trained councillors within that space.
Madam Chair, in debating...
Flick Hunt.
I was debating the...
Just a question, JP. Will we be doing the workshopping for things like the Lakes A Zone? Because when we did the district plan, as a whole council, we workshopped for 3 years prior to going out to the community. And that's the political, will we be providing that political overlay prior to going out to the community for them to submit on?
Councillors, I think the key there is absolutely. One of the things about the rolling reviews is we're not just trying to create work. One of the important things about the rolling review is making sure we're doing what is required, when it's required, and frankly in this situation, if it's required. You know, that one of the things that sits on the table is, okay, we didn't do the Lakes A Zone through this. How much of it's not working? Are we happy with it? How much of a light touch, detailed touch needs to be undertaken? So that's part of that discussion about how that rolling review is undertaken, because certainly one of the things that we're trying to promote through the district plan is that enablement and lightening the touch. So those could be, it's how long is a piece of string. So Councillor, you're absolutely right. That's a key political discussion about how we bring that political overlay and those views into that rolling review discussion as to how complicated we make some of those review aspects. So yes, that would be the key element of some of that.
Your Worship. So JP, why then can't you have your 5 qualified commissioners sitting up in the policy committee, plus your Evie, appointed commissioner, and when it comes to a hearing on whatever it might be, as part of the district plan, you do what we do now, and that is simply select 3 to hear it. You don't have to have everybody there. You would do as we do now on a rolling basis, hear them, and everybody gets equal amount of time, and then you get equal, at the same time you get different input philosophically, which is excellent. So why can't the 5 sit up there and go through that process?
Councillors, yes, that's an option. As I said, what we've done previously is though we've had the 3 and we've used the 3. So if it's a case of having more than the 3 and you choosing a subset.
Well, wrong, JP. We've always had about 5, and the chair selects which 2 will come on the hearing.
Did I hear, but I'm trying to get my head around this too. Didn't I not hear you say that those other commissioners are welcome to be part of that committee? Yeah.
Worship, why not put them there in official capacity?
Do you want to answer that, Jeff?
Councillors, I think what the key thing about the recommendation, when you look at it, the only difference from what we have now, what you have had operating, is that you've got a Te Aroha representative there. That's really the key difference. So the way that things have operated in the past, the bringing items back to workshops, the openness of discussions are all effectively the same as what they were previously. The reason for the 3 and not the 5, and in my view and in the discussions that have been held to date, is that it is quite critical that Te Aroha do have confidence and consistency in the interactions with this committee. One of the key parts of it is that and I think Councillor Sturt raised this earlier on, is that what are Te Arawa looking for at the end of the day? What are they wanting to have in terms of certainty and direction? So what a key thing is of course the district plan, is that land use issues from an iwi perspective are pivotal. The way land is used is of pivotal importance and interest to iwi, absolutely critical. And so what this committee is doing is working closely with Te Arawa to actually determine the future district land use issues. Now, obviously, that comes back to council, and so that's the pivotal nature of this committee, in my view, with respect to the relationship to iwi. Now, the other side of the coin is that they also need to have confidence that when consents are being heard, that the district plan is going to be maintained, and the intent of the district plan, as it's been articulated, is actually withheld within that quasi-judicial review, and that there is not bias or determination brought into the mix that fundamentally is almost relitigating parts of the policy of the district plan. That's what they would be very concerned about, and hence the oversight or input, if you like, of Te Arawa with regards to the selection of the commissioners on the panel. So that gives them, one, a direction and ability to influence and to express their views with regards to policy and direction and land use, and two, it gives them confidence that once that policy has been put into place, it will be administered in a fair and robust and transparent manner. So that's what's in it, in my view, from a Te Arawa perspective. And I think actually also goes to the understanding of why the recommendations have been made as they are.
No, there appeared... No.
I am very happy with it.
Yeah.
What I was talking about was the use of qualified people at this table.
Yeah, we're just putting questions at this stage, not really making comment. There appear to be no more questions. Right. Do you want me to put the motion? There's one. Debate. Yeah, we can.
Madam Chair, I, as one of the main movers of this report to lay on the table, I'm absolutely delighted that the matters have now been clarified. And during the discussion here today, it's clarified it even further for me. For people in the community to use this, that my asking that it lay on the table as a smokescreen of being anti-Te Arawa is quite incorrect. We had that discussion on the 26th of May. We said that we wanted Te Arawa involvement, and as Councillor Serene just reiterated, we didn't have a problem with Te Arawa having a say on the RMA policy committee. And I'm happy with every aspect now of this, except I believe the RMA policy committee is too narrow. I believe that maybe the membership of the RMA policy committee should be increased to 3 plus Te Arawa. But then it creates a dilemma. Well, why did other councillors get qualified if in the future they weren't going to be needed? And the other question I've got is, surely this council should have a control over who does get qualified and who doesn't get qualified in the future. I don't think individuals should be running off and getting accredited. It's a certain type of person who I'm not. I'm not suitable to be a RMA policy committee type person. But there are others who have that skill and are academically or intellectually they find it stimulating. It certainly doesn't push my buttons. I'd rather watch a game of rugby. But Madam Chair, that raises a few questions for the future. But I'm going to test the water, and I believe that the RMA Policy Committee be increased to 3. Two. Bullet point 2.
Yep.
The elected councillor membership be Councillor Hunt, Councillor Webber and Councillor Bentley. So that's my, that's the only amendment I'm preferring.
Seconder for your proposed amendment? Councillor McVicker. Now, does anybody wish to speak to this amendment?
Madam Chair, the reason why I've put the amendment is I'm worried about succession. We've got an election and we may have a representation review, and Councillor Hunt and Councillor Webber lose their seats. We'll have Councillor Gould, Councillor Kent and Councillor Bentley as the only accredited, trained, if they get re-elected, of course, I'm presuming a lot, are the only accredited people. Not one of them is accredited as a chair. I know we've only got till next year, and this possibly will be reviewed, but the other question I have is, does the Te Arawa person have to be accredited as well? Yes, okay, that's cool. So I'm happy that my amendment go forward. Thank you for seconding it for debate, Councillor McVicker.
Well, I'm not going to support that amendment. I think there is a balance that you've got to strike so that one doesn't feel overwhelmed. But I do believe, I think what you're trying to achieve, Councillor Stewart, is renewal. And it is a good thing to have renewal. But renewal can happen by their participation in that committee without, and I'm very happy about that. They'll learn, they'll come through, they'll get more experience, and I think we've got the weighting in this report, or the officers have put the weighting right as it is. But as a district, you're absolutely right. We need to watch that we do keep bringing on new commissioners. That commissioners that we currently have, and we do have one that's a chair trained, and that's that the commissioners that we have who have undertaken their training and well done and passed also be encouraged to go that next step. But I think the balance here for making what is policy decisions is right. So I won't be supporting that amendment.
Madam Chair, I think we need a backstop, because for an emergency, if Councillor Hunt or Webber get injured in an accident, then we need 3 people there. And it may be that the other 1, 2 or 3 people may never ever be used, but at least you've got something in policy which you can get a group of 3 people.
The council could make a decision to base or to put extra commissioners there as needed. Yep, as required. And that's the sort of renewal that you need. And you're right, it's the safety and the backup. Councillor Donaldson.
Yeah, look, I was prepared to contemplate an alternate for the 2 councillors on there, but I recall when we went through the district plan hearings process that we locked it down to a total of 3 for cost reasons and for getting 3 people in one place at one time. And that was a massive process, and all kudos to those 3 members for the commitment and effort to get that through. So, look, I think that it can be done with a total of 3, the 2 nominated members and an iwi member. I'd be open to having an alternate decided by council if one of them was unavailable, in an emergency. But I think that's the right number, and I like that, like the balance where it's at.
The aspect that wasn't clear is that council has the ability to nominate a replacement, and that would be the pool of trained commissioners that we've got. Yeah. Mm. You have. Thank you. So the amendment is withdrawn. Do we have any more? Yep. Yep. That council has the right to appoint an alternative commissioner. And that's the way you'll get renewal and exposure to policy. Great. Does anyone wish to speak to that amendment? I think we have. Yeah.
Committed are we to the Tiara 1/3 representation issue?
Yeah, yeah, I'm committed. Yeah.
I mean, is that restricting us, Madam Chair, from not having all commissioners, all 5 of them, on there? Is that the reason why we wouldn't want to go down that track?
I think you heard an answer from a council officer that when the district plan was set, it was an onerous task that councillors undertook and commissioners undertook and did very, very well. You don't need 5. And cost is certainly an answer.
No cost. There's no cost.
No, because they're sitting there not being used. That's right. Okay. Any more debate? Councillor Kawate.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm actually pleased that this came back. This was put to lie on the table, and because I've had another good look at it, and I think it has been improved. It definitely has been improved. It is best practice to separate policy from operational. That is nothing new, and most organisations actually look to do that. And I think that's the clarity of that now has become very, very clear. This is another step in what we agreed to earlier on, which is in our to give real effect to the relationship with Te Arawa and to assisting them to have some input into the decision making with this council. And this is just another step to our commitment to achieve that. The other thing also that we haven't spoken about this morning is it gives applicants an opportunity from absolutely to actually have a look and see who do we have available as commissioners. That's the other thing too. I think we can say the policy committee can recommend, but it also gives applicants an opportunity to say, to have some input, I believe, into saying who might be suitable and who might not be. That is actually an applicant's right. That is an applicant's right these days to actually say, we would prefer to see somebody there who has knowledge of what it is that we are going to talk about and present to council. So that is not our sole right. So I'm really pleased about that. There's one thing I was a little bit disappointed in is when we insist that the commissioners should have the chairing experience. I did a quick ring around to 4 people in town the other day. 3 of them do have chair experience and they're qualified as chairs to sit on as commissioners. 3 of them have it. The one that gets the most work out of this city doesn't have the chairing accreditation, but has commissioning accreditation. I've been looking at the other councils throughout the country who are advertising for qualified commissioners, and very rarely, I haven't seen one so far that insists on them having chairs accreditation. So maybe, but there are a lot of people now who actually earn their living through being accredited commissioners. So, but I'm really pleased. I think this is our commitment again to developing the iwi capacity to assist us in our work in the future. So I'm going to be voting in favour of, what is it, the numbers 3 and 4, 5 and 6. So thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just support this.
Can put the amendment before we go any further. So Councillor Stewart's amendment. No, he proposed the amendment. We now need to put the amendment that any alternative, Councillor Stewart's amendment, any alternative amendment, any appointed alternative as approved by council. All those in favour of that amendment, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Stewart, yeah. Right, in 8 on 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Councillor Gould.
I'm concerned with the timing. I think the timing of the 30th of October 2015 is wrong, for the simple reason I'll quote and I'll table page 23 of today's Daily Post. Te Arua Partnership Board call for nominations. The voting closes on 12 noon, Thursday, the 29th of October 2015. With that, you can also put in some postal votes from different areas, so that will extend the date after the 30th. It means that the candidates, if they get a very close vote with 1 or 2 votes, they may want to appeal, which means you go to the court and that can drag out, but they'll need at least $10,000.
Could I just, these are enabling recommendations, and whenever those elections are over, that's when that position would be filled.
Well, the problem is that on page 36, 8.1, you've got all 3 people have to be RMA trained. To get the iwi representative on there, you have to have a nomination first from the board, and the board won't be really going until probably the middle of November. So,
you're absolutely right. JP, could you answer that? It's just about when this position would be filled.
Madam, Your Worship, just one other point before I start. So the other sort of small change that we just need in the document or the resolution before you is terms of in point 2, the first sentence, the council resolves to establish an RMA policy committee, terms of reference included in attachment 1 as amended to reflect what has been carried. Councillors, the terms of reference at the back of the document set the quorum at 2. So the intention there was that if it does take Te Arawa some time to establish that representative to come to that committee, if that committee needs to meet and progress, that the quorum is set at 2, so that member can come on when they are appointed, so we can keep going in that space. The second part of that contingency is covered off in point 6. So Rick, could you just roll down to point 6 of the resolution? And that's really they're just giving us the catch-all in the last sentence that the CE be authorised to appoint commissioners for any consent hearings that may occur until a panel is established. And so that I've got 2 sort of protections within that. In that, first, the terms of reference of the RMA Policy Committee, and secondly, with the CE be authorised to appoint panel members if there's any consents that need to proceed while we have this gap of a changeover.
I hadn't realised how significant that is, that the CE be authorised to appoint commissioners. That's from within our trained commissioners, or is that externally?
This is consent hearings, so this would be external. So in effect, what we would be applying is what currently exists under the current processes, was that where the applicant says under section 100A, I'd like an independent commissioner, we're just saying that we're going to automatically undertake that using an independent commissioner as appointed by the Chief Executive.
I believe that the full council needs to approve the panel members, as we need to be in control of our own destiny. I don't believe it should be up to just 2 councillors, the Chief Executive and some officers. I believe that the board recommendation should come here, because each councillor might know something about one of those potential commissioners which other people do not know about. And the other thing is that this would have been better to have a workshop first, rather than go straight into this debate as understanding orders. Each councillor is entitled to 5 minutes speaking rights, but in workshops you can listen to other people and you can respond at different times. So around the table today we may have some councillors who've got some further opinions who want to address or find out on some issues, and they won't be given the opportunity as they have already spoken. The chairing qualifications, I believe that the maybe better to put possible chairing qualifications, because you're trying to get the best 10 people, up to 10 people, and it may be that a person who's got specific engineering qualifications is not a trained chairperson, but he would be very ideal in certain circumstances. And page 34, 5.3 is wrong. And I'll just have to listen to my colleagues on what they say about the other recommendation.
Would you like to just clarify about the council role to appoint the panel and delegate the powers? It's been covered.
Yes, Your Worship.
Yeah.
My apology, maybe I haven't been clear enough. The intention was that Councillor Hunt and Councillor Wepper, as the two candidates in the RMA Policy Committee, would then join two iwi representatives on determining the criteria. After the expressions of interest process, they would also evaluate those candidates and they would put forward a set of recommendations to Council. So it is only Council that can appoint the panel and delegate the powers to those panel members. So hopefully that clarifies that question for the councillor. The second part of that was around, we've identified within the report, and it's the section under section 5.3, so on page 34, that we're putting forward there some proposed criteria. This is not the final criteria, so I've mentioned proposals. So I've set forward here, and this is may is the important thing, because I'm not determining the criteria. That is for that panel to determine, but I've put forward some possible criteria, which includes commissioner accreditation, obviously, chair accreditation, that may be optional, and then obviously number of years, demonstrated understanding, knowledge of our district, and any other specialist training. So that's really the start of a 10 that I've identified in the report. That's not the final set of criteria. That is for that panel, including councillors, the iwi reps, to determine what goes into that expressions of interest. So it may be that in that case the chair qualification is optional, or beneficial, might be the words, desirable, but does not preclude necessarily anyone from that expressions of interest process. So, Councillor, I hope that clarifies some of that. As far as process as to why we've come back trying to address the questions from the last item, last time it was discussed. It was tabled, and it was tabled in a public forum, and so it lay on the table. So sort of the decision in preparing this report was it's probably best to keep it as a public discussion in this forum, but certainly my door was open to any other queries or questions or discussion.
JP, I do think we're at the debating point. It was not a point for asking for further questions or clarification. Does anyone wish to speak to the motion? Thank you, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've sat and listened to the debate going on, and I'm actually probably in the unique position of probably being the only person around this table who has not only been through the consenting process with this council, but I've been through it from both sides. And I've also been through it with an independent commissioner. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience, because it may change your views. When I first came to Rotorua, I came here to set up a business, and I was warned by people who said to me, "Why are you going to Rotorua? It's the most difficult place in the country to do business. Between the regional council and the district council, they'll tie you up in knots." And I laughed. I didn't believe them. I arrived here, put some plans in, was told I needed to submit a resource consent application, did so. Was then suddenly told it had to be public notified. So that went ahead. I submitted over 1,000 submissions, which were delivered to me by an ex-senior manager of this council, who is I will say he's no longer employed here, and thank God, who brought 1,000 submissions into me, dumped them on my table and said to me, I'm going to put you out of business. As a result of that, I invoked Section 101, is it? And decided I would not be heard by this council because I did not believe I would get a fair hearing. So I went down the track of an independent commissioner. $19,000 later, and I think that's after I'd won my appeal to have my costs reduced by $4,000 that were overcharged by this council. And I would have to say that in retrospect, I would pick 3 of the councillors around this table to hear my case over a commissioner any day. And the reason for that is quite simple. As an applicant coming in, you have no say whatsoever over who is going to hear your case. You are told by this council that you have a choice. You can be heard by 1 commissioner, or you can be heard by 3 commissioners. Take your pick. So you do a quick calculation when they tell you how much they're going to charge you, and you say, I can't afford 3 commissioners, so I'll go with 1 commissioner. So at the end of all this, what comes out of it is a very educated report from this commissioner who tells me in no uncertain terms that I can have barking dogs on a rural property, rounding up sheep, permitted activity, no problem. But I'm not allowed to train dogs outside. How stupid. And that's what I got from this council for $19,000. It nearly wrecked that business. I have been going around recently looking to buy a property in Rotorua. I'm staggered by the number of buildings I've inspected that have no consents, no formal sign-offs, no proper resource consents in this city. It's probably 50% of the properties I've looked at. And if you ask them why, it's because this council has made it too damn difficult and too damned expensive to actually get consent, so people have said, stuff you, I'll do it anyway. And I think Councillor Sturt will probably back me up on that. So we come back to what's being proposed here, and I've done some calculations from where my experience has been. Under the current scenario, and I know about hearings because I've been a hearings commissioner and I've heard 4 hearings. The average hearing lasts about 4 hours, including the write-up, and maybe an hour on site. So you're looking maybe 5 hours for the average consent hearing. Under the way we're currently charging to those applicants, and I disagree because I got charged every single bit, and they even tried to charge me for your consultants as well as our consultants, but we got away with that one. Under the current scenario, what will be charged is 3 councillors who know the city, know the district plan, and are not biased in the way that staff are biased because they are trying to achieve an outcome.
Councillor Kent.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor.
I will disallow that remark about staff.
I am expressing to this council my experience of what has happened with this council because you need to know.
No, we don't, Madam Chair. No.
Ruling that out of order. This is a council that you're talking about before we were elected and before this chief executive has brought substantial change to the integrating consent. You can move on to the issues before us.
The issue I'm talking about now is the cost to an applicant. The way it's done currently, that average consent would be three hearings commissioners at $80 an hour. They don't get paid for all the hours they spend reading up on it and studying any law they have to study up on it. And they only get paid for the time they're actually at the hearing and the time they spend basically debating what the decision is can be, and then the staff write the thing up. Cost for that average 5 hours, $1,495, including GST. Take a commissioner doing that same job. That commissioner is going to take about 8 hours that will be chargeable, because they charge for the study time before they start, they charge for travel, they charge for their deliberation time afterwards, and they write up the report, which they also charge for. So you can say that 5-hour consent is probably 8 hours with a single commissioner. Do a quick sum. 8 hours at $160 plus GST, $1,440. You've got a choice. $1,495 from 3 councillors versus $1,440 from 1 commissioner. To have it heard by 3 commissioners, it's actually $3,864. Are you trying to put this town out of action?
Councillor Kent, your time is up. I'm sorry. Do you want to just conclude with your, with your observations of this report?
I implore this council to think very seriously about what you're doing. We have too many buildings out there without consents because you've made it too difficult, you've made it too expensive.
Point of order, I haven't made anything more expensive.
I haven't said you, Madam Mayor, and please stop taking everything I say personally. I have said the council has made.
I don't take it personally.
I believe that what is being proposed has not been thought through properly. I agree to Yarra. Yes, they should have be trained commissioners. Yes, they should be on the panel. But I believe the panel shouldn't be chosen by the staff. I believe it should be done the same way they do in a court of law, where you have a panel.
Councillor Kent, I'm sorry, but your time
draw.
is up.
That would be fair, and that might stimulate the economy of this town.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Interestingly, at my first training, there were 22 people in 2012, and 11 of those were iwi. So it was at my RMA Commissioner's training, half of the people doing their training in 2012 were iwi in the class I was in, iwi. So in my recent training of chairs, there were I think about 15, and there were 2 iwi. Now, there are 2 chair trainings a year, I believe, as well as all the other trainings going on. I'm really pleased this has come back to our table, because it's a very complex process we're looking at, and we have mixed the policy and the operation of that policy. We've done so very successfully, but we've never been at this crossroads of having a new plan. And because of the rolling reviews, unlike in the past where a plan happened and then there was no changes to the policy, there was simply implementation of it by the commissioners for 15 years, you weren't going to have that conflict. But due to the fact that the RMA has now been changed by central government to a rolling review, there will always be that perceived conflict. So we are in a different time frame than we were in the past. Now, what they asked for isn't necessarily exactly what we may think we're giving them, but they asked, in my understanding, to have a role at the planning stage, at the policy stage, not the implementation of that policy. And it is at the implementation of that policy, whether it's by councillors or independent commissioners, that the robustness of our plan will be highlighted. Ideally, there'll be very few consents that come through, because we'll have got it pretty much right. If there are a whole lot that come through, then that will gain the attention of the rolling review. And the commissioners will not be in the difficult position of doing a Lakes A zone when an application comes out for one of the lakes areas for a consent hearing. So the separation, I think, is very good practice. This has come about around the country because there were some bad decisions made. Not here, but there were some bad decisions made, and sometimes the conduct of some commissioners in some hearings was not the standard that was accepted. There were issues with some of the decision making that ended up in court, and they have now realised that having a separation between those is the best way forward. So we are following a growing trend of doing this separation, and as I said, largely fuelled by the changes in the rolling reviews. I think it's going to give that rigour, as I've said. I think the training that my colleagues have done will come to the fore and be of huge value when we workshop these issues coming up. None of it's wasted. In fact, we could all be trained commissioners for the information and the skills that it gives us in making those planning decisions prior at the workshop level to it coming to this point. Now, I support it. I believe it's going to avoid the conflict going forward. We're going to end up with some well-qualified specialist commissioners. And geothermal, all the areas that the unique things of our environment, we're going to have the opportunity to have that technical expertise should we require it. We can change our mind at the next election if we find it's blown out costs of all proportion. We will analyse those rigorously. And I think that it's a good thing to move forward, and I'm glad that I'm hearing support from around the table from that. Thank you.
More debate. I'm going to put the motions 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 as amended. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. I understand. We'll have a show. Thank you.
Remind you that on 4.2 of JP's paper, the Tauranga involvement in which was in the Council's statement of proposal was, quote, one suitably qualified representative nominated by Tauranga as a commissioner to all statutory hearing committees.
Well, we can't yet. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we have precluded them from that.
Yeah, it's only in the policy area.
Thank you. So I declare the meeting closed. That's the past. So locked in the past. That is so sad.
You'll see the funny side of this. Daily Post put this on page 1 of yesterday's paper. There's 6 councillors and 1 mayor. They obviously think they need 6 councillors. And yet on page 2 they said 2 less.
Oh.